What if some of the things you were taught about love, desire, relationships, and human nature were never as simple as you believed? What if the tension between freedom and commitment, between desire and responsibility, between intimacy and independence, is not a flaw in human beings, but part of what makes us human? For generations, we have inherited powerful stories about how relationships are supposed to work. We are told what commitment should look like, what desire means, what a successful life should be, and even what financial success should feel like. But beneath those familiar stories is a far more complicated reality. Human beings want connection, yet we also value freedom. We seek security, yet we are drawn toward novelty. We want intimacy, yet we fear losing ourselves. And while we pursue money for security, we can sometimes discover that earning more does not automatically make us freer. So what happens when we stop accepting these assumptions without question? What happens when we begin examining our desires instead of being controlled by them? When we learn that attraction is not a command, jealousy is not proof, and commitment does not have to mean possession. When we understand that financial freedom is not simply about becoming rich, but about creating choices, the ability to walk away, to adapt, to protect your future, and to live according to your values. This is not a story about finding one perfect formula for love, sex, money, or happiness. It is a journey into something much more challenging. Understanding ourselves. Because your instincts may influence you. Your circumstances may limit you. Society may give you a script, but your choices still matter. And the most important question may not be, what are human beings supposed to want? It may be, what kind of person and what kind of life will you consciously choose to build? Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that one of the stories you have always been told about human beings is incomplete. You look around at the world and realize that many of the rules you thought were natural may actually be cultural habits, historical arrangements, or ideas repeated so often that nobody remembers to question them. We are told stories about love, marriage, desire, jealousy, success, money, and happiness, and because these stories surround us from childhood, they can begin to feel less like stories and more like facts. But what if some of our deepest assumptions about human sexuality deserve a second look? What if the human being sitting across from you is not simply a creature programmed for competition, possession, and individual survival? What if cooperation, intimacy, social connection, play, generosity, and shared responsibility are just as deeply woven into our nature? And what if understanding that possibility could change not only the way we think about sex and relationships, but also the way we think about freedom, wealth, and the life we are trying to build? Let us begin with something we rarely question: the belief that human beings are naturally designed to compete for scarce resources, and that our intimate relationships are fundamentally contests over possession. We have inherited powerful cultural narratives about romance. We are told that love means finding one special person, that jealousy proves depth of feeling, that sexual exclusivity is the natural endpoint of intimacy, and that desire must fit neatly inside the structures our society has created. Some of these arrangements may work beautifully for particular people. The mistake is assuming that, because a social arrangement works for us, it must therefore be the only arrangement human nature permits. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. We have created countless ways of organizing families, partnerships, communities, economies, and social responsibilities. The human story is much more diverse than any single template. This does not mean that every relationship structure is equally healthy, nor does it mean that every impulse should be followed. It means something more interesting. We should distinguish between what is biologically possible, what is psychologically common, what is culturally encouraged, and what is personally right for us. Those are not always the same thing. A person can choose monogamy and choose it wholeheartedly. Another person may discover that conventional expectations do not describe their experience. A healthy life does not begin with forcing every human being into the same mold. It begins with understanding ourselves honestly enough to make conscious choices, That distinction between nature and culture, one of the most fascinating questions we can ask about ourselves. Human beings are biological creatures, but we are also storytelling creatures. We create explanations for our behavior, and then those explanations become part of the environment that shapes future behavior. We build institutions, give them names, create rules around them, teach those rules to our children, and eventually forget that they were created by human beings in the first place. Marriage, property, money, social status, and many expectations surrounding relationships have all changed throughout history. The fact that something has existed for a long time does not automatically tell us why it exists or whether it is the only possible way to organize human life. Now consider the connection with money. Financial systems are also stories that became structures. A piece of paper or a digital number has value because human beings collectively agree that it does. We build entire economies around these shared agreements, yet no sensible investor would say, because our current financial system exists, I never need to understand how it works. Quite the opposite. Financial freedom begins when you stop treating the financial world as an invisible force and start learning its rules. You ask where your money goes. You examine what you own and what you owe. You learn about risk. You distinguish an asset from a liability. You stop confusing social status with actual wealth. The same intellectual habit can be applied to relationships. Examine the assumptions you inherited before allowing them to determine the life you build. Here is a principle worth remembering. Freedom begins when you can distinguish a rule from a reality. A rule may say that relationships must look a certain way. Reality may be more complicated. A rule may say that success means displaying expensive possessions. Reality may be that financial independence comes from keeping expenses manageable and investing consistently. A rule may say that desire makes us selfish competitors. Reality may include cooperation, generosity, and social bonding. Once you learn to separate assumptions from evidence, you gain something valuable, the ability to choose rather than merely obey. This is not an argument against tradition. Tradition can contain accumulated wisdom, but tradition can also contain accumulated mistakes. The wise person does not automatically reject tradition, nor do they automatically worship it. They examine it. They ask what problem it originally solved. They ask whether the circumstances still exist. They ask who benefits from the arrangement. They ask whether the arrangement creates well-being or merely preserves itself. That is the same approach a financially intelligent person takes toward inherited financial advice. Everyone in my family bought a house is not automatically a reason for you to buy one. Everyone invests this way is not automatically evidence that the strategy suits your circumstances. A tradition is a starting point for inquiry, not the end of it. When we begin looking at human sexuality through this broader lens, another fascinating truth appears. Desire is complicated. It does not always follow the tidy categories we would prefer. Human beings can experience attraction, affection, jealousy, tenderness, curiosity, commitment, novelty, insecurity, generosity, and fear, sometimes all within the same relationship. We can deeply love someone and still experience attraction to another person. We can experience desire without wanting a relationship. We can want a relationship without wanting sexual intimacy at a particular moment. We can desire closeness and independence at the same time. The existence of these contradictions does not necessarily mean that something is wrong with us. It may simply mean that human psychology is more complicated than the stories we use to explain it. The mature response to complexity is not panic. It is curiosity. Curiosity is one of the most valuable qualities a person can develop because it allows us to investigate an experience before judging it. Instead of asking, "Why am I feeling this? Therefore, what is wrong with me?" we can ask, "What does this feeling mean? What circumstances produced it? What values do I want to act upon? What consequences should I consider?" Feeling something and acting upon it are different events. Desire can be information without becoming an instruction. This is a critical distinction. We do not need to obey every emotion we experience. We do not need to suppress every emotion either. We can observe feelings, understand them, and then make deliberate choices. That is emotional maturity. It is also remarkably similar to financial discipline. You may want something immediately, but desire is not affordability. You may feel the urge to spend, but the urge is not a financial plan. You may experience fear during a market downturn, but fear is not necessarily a reason to sell everything. In both finance and relationships, the ability to create a pause between impulse and action can dramatically improve the quality of your decisions. One of the most useful financial freedom principles is this: do not confuse what you feel now with what you will value later. That principle applies beautifully to human relationships. The excitement of a new romance can be extraordinary, but a life is much longer than the first few months of attraction. The pain of temporary jealousy can feel overwhelming, but acting destructively from that emotion can damage a relationship permanently. The pressure to conform can be intense, but living for other people's approval can create decades of dissatisfaction. The ability to think beyond the present moment is one of the foundations of freedom. And perhaps this is where our conversation becomes most interesting. What if freedom does not mean doing whatever we feel like doing? What if freedom means developing enough self-understanding that our actions reflect our deepest values rather than our strongest impulses? That is a much more demanding definition of freedom. It requires discipline. It requires reflection. It requires accepting that our desires can be real without being commands. Imagine a person who wants financial independence but spends every paycheck trying to impress people. They are not free. Even though they are technically free to spend their money, their behavior is being controlled by social comparison. Now imagine someone who wants a healthy relationship but constantly monitors their partner because they are terrified of abandonment. They may be in a relationship, but fear is controlling their behavior. In both cases, the problem is not lack of options. It is lack of internal freedom. This is why self-knowledge matters so much. If you do not understand your own motivations, someone else can easily influence them. Advertising can tell you what you supposedly need. Social media can tell you what your relationship should look like. Friends can tell you what you should desire. Cultural expectations can tell you what success is supposed to mean. And fear can tell you what you must never risk. But eventually, you have to become the author of your own decisions. That does not mean ignoring society. We are social creatures. We depend on other people. We need communities, friendships, families, colleagues, and partners. Human beings have achieved extraordinary things precisely because we cooperate. The fantasy of complete independence is misleading. None of us becomes successful entirely alone. The goal is not isolation. The goal is interdependence without losing agency. There is an enormous difference between dependence and interdependence. Dependence says, without you, I cannot function. Interdependence says, I can stand on my own, and I choose to build something with you. The first can create fear. The second can create partnership. Financial independence works the same way. The goal is not to reject every form of assistance. Families help one another. Business partners depend on one another. Communities create safety nets. Financial independence means developing enough resources, skills, and judgment that you are not permanently trapped by a lack of options. It gives you room to choose cooperation because you want to cooperate rather than because you have no alternative, and that leads to one of the most important ideas we can carry into relationships. Cooperation is not weakness. We live in cultures that often celebrate the individual hero. The person who succeeds alone, the entrepreneur who built everything from nothing, the romantic hero who conquers the person they desire, the competitor who defeats everyone else. These stories are entertaining, but they leave out something essential. Behind almost every successful human being is a network of cooperation. Teachers, friends, colleagues, family members, mentors, customers, communities, and strangers contribute to the conditions in which success becomes possible. Human achievement is deeply social. The same can be true of intimate relationships. A strong relationship is not a contest with one winner. It is a system in which the people can ideally increase one another's well-being. That does not mean they will never disagree. It means disagreement does not have to become war. It means one person's success does not automatically require the other's failure. It means both people can have needs, preferences, ambitions, and boundaries. This is where the concept of abundance becomes important. Financial scarcity tells us there is never enough money, opportunity, or security. That mindset can make people competitive even when cooperation would benefit them more. Relationship scarcity can operate similarly. If we believe affection is always scarce, we may become possessive. If we believe love must be won against rivals, we may interpret every attractive person as a threat. If we believe another person's freedom automatically reduces our own security, we may try to control them, but control is not the same as security. A person who stays with you because they are afraid of you is not giving you the same thing as a person who stays because they freely choose you. That distinction matters. Healthy relationships cannot be built entirely through control, because control eventually destroys the very trust it is trying to protect. When you monitor someone constantly, you may discover information, but you do not necessarily create intimacy. When you restrict someone's choices, you may reduce opportunities for betrayal, but you also reduce opportunities for genuine trust. Security cannot be manufactured entirely through surveillance. The same principle applies to financial life. If your entire strategy is to control every variable, you will eventually become exhausted because life contains uncertainty. A wiser financial strategy builds resilience. You maintain an emergency fund. You diversify appropriately. You manage debt. You develop skills. You insure against meaningful risks when appropriate. You accept that uncertainty exists and prepare for it rather than pretending you can eliminate it. Relationships need resilience too. A resilient relationship does not depend on the fantasy that nothing unexpected will ever happen. It depends on the ability to communicate when something unexpected does happen. That may be the most important reason to study ourselves honestly. If we understand that human beings are complicated, we can become less shocked by complexity. We can discuss difficult feelings without immediately turning them into moral emergencies. We can distinguish between experiencing an emotion and choosing a behavior. We can recognize that jealousy is a feeling, not a license for control. Attraction is a feeling, not a command. Fear is a feeling, not always a reliable forecast. Love is a feeling, but healthy love also requires behavior. This is where responsibility enters. We should not use human nature as an excuse for harmful behavior. Saying, people have impulses, does not justify betrayal, coercion, manipulation, dishonesty, or abuse. Understanding behavior is not the same as approving it. In fact, understanding can increase responsibility because once we recognize our tendencies, we have more opportunity to manage them consciously. Person who knows they are easily tempted by impulse can create boundaries. A person who knows jealousy is a trigger can learn communication skills. A person who recognizes a pattern of emotional avoidance can seek counseling. A person who knows they spend impulsively can automate savings. A person who knows they are influenced by social pressure can practice saying no. Self-knowledge becomes useful when it changes behavior. And that is why I want to introduce another principle. Understanding yourself is valuable. Designing your life around that understanding is freedom. Knowledge without action is merely information. The goal is integration. Your understanding of human behavior should help you create relationships that are healthier, not simply arguments that sound intelligent. Your understanding of money should help you build financial security, not merely conversations about wealth. Your understanding of yourself should help you live with greater honesty. Now, let us return to the question of what human beings are naturally like. We should be cautious about simplistic answers. Evolutionary explanations can be useful, but they can also be abused. Saying that a behavior may have evolutionary roots does not mean the behavior is inevitable, desirable, or morally justified. Humans are capable of learning, culture, cooperation, self-control, and technological innovation on a remarkable scale. Biology gives us tendencies and capacities. Culture and conscious decision-making shape how those capacities are expressed. We are neither prisoners of biology nor completely independent of it. We are something more interesting. Biological creatures capable of reflecting on our biology. That capacity may be one of our greatest advantages. We can notice our impulses. We can question our assumptions. We can study our history. We can compare cultures. We can gather evidence. We can change our institutions. We can create new habits. We can decide that a pattern inherited from the past no longer serves our circumstances. That is an extraordinary form of freedom. Think about financial systems again. Humans created money, markets, corporations, banks, contracts, and investment strategies. Because we created them, we can also redesign them. We do not have to treat every financial practice as a law of nature. Similarly, social arrangements are human creations. We can examine them, improve them, and adapt them, but adaptation requires humility. We must be willing to say, "Perhaps I was wrong." That sentence can feel threatening because our identities become attached to our beliefs. Yet changing your mind when evidence changes is not weakness. It is intellectual honesty. Investors must sometimes admit that an investment thesis was wrong. Scientists must revise hypotheses. Leaders must change strategies. Individuals must reconsider beliefs about relationships and themselves. The willingness to revise is a form of strength. Here is another principle to carry with you. A belief should be a tool, not a prison. If a belief helps you understand life and make healthy choices, use it. If evidence and experience show that the belief is harming you, examine it. Do not protect a belief simply because it has been with you for a long time. This principle can transform the way we think about success. Many people inherit a definition of success that centers on appearance: a bigger house, a more expensive car, a higher title, a more glamorous partner, more followers, more possessions. But if you achieve all those things and still feel controlled by fear, debt, loneliness, or social approval, have you really achieved freedom? Financial independence gives us a more useful definition. Wealth is not merely what you own. It is the degree to which your resources support the life you value. A modest lifestyle with strong savings and meaningful relationships may create more freedom than an extravagant lifestyle financed by debt and constant anxiety. The same logic applies to relationships. A relationship that looks perfect from the outside may be emotionally exhausting inside. A relationship that does not fit conventional expectations may, nevertheless, be respectful, honest, and deeply supportive. Appearance is not the same as health. And this may be one of the most important lessons we can take from examining human behavior. Do not confuse social approval with well-being. The world may reward appearances. Your life must live with the consequences. So ask yourself what you actually want, not what you were told to want. Not what your friends want, not what advertisements suggest. Not what social media celebrates. What kind of relationship allows you to become more fully yourself? What kind of financial life gives you genuine security? What kind of community makes you feel connected rather than controlled? What kind of habits allow your health and ambitions to coexist? Those questions are not selfish. They are foundational. Because once you understand what you value, you can begin aligning your decisions with those values. And alignment is where freedom becomes practical. You do not need to reject every social expectation. You need to understand why you are accepting it. You do not need to abandon tradition. You need to know whether the tradition serves your values. You do not need to follow every desire. You need to understand what your desires are telling you. You do not need to reject relationships. You need to build relationships that respect autonomy and cooperation. You do not need to become wealthy by conventional standards. You need to create enough financial resilience to support the life you value. That is a different kind of success. It is quieter. It is less performative. And perhaps that is why it is so powerful, because when you stop trying to impress everyone, You can finally start building something that belongs to you. So as we begin this exploration, I want you to carry one final thought. The purpose of understanding human nature is not to surrender to instinct. It is to gain enough insight that instinct becomes one voice in the conversation rather than the voice that controls the entire room. Your desires matter. Your values matter. Your relationships matter. Your health matters. Your financial future matters. But none of these things needs to exist in isolation. You can build a life in which cooperation and independence support each other. You can build relationships based on honesty rather than fear. You can pursue financial freedom without sacrificing the human connections that make freedom meaningful. You can question cultural assumptions without becoming cynical about culture itself. You can respect biology without treating biology as destiny. And perhaps that is where our story truly begins, not with the claim that human beings are one particular way, but with the willingness to ask a better question. What are we capable of becoming when we understand ourselves more honestly? That question is bigger than sexuality. It is a question about freedom. It is a question about responsibility. It is a question about love. It is a question about money. It is a question about what kind of civilization we want to create, and what kind of life we want to live within it, because the moment you realize that some of the rules governing your life are stories rather than laws of nature, a new possibility appears. You can examine the story. You can keep what serves you. You can change what does not, and you can begin writing the next chapter with your eyes open. There is a question that can make an ordinary conversation suddenly become much more interesting. What if the way we understand ourselves has been shaped as much by the stories we tell about human nature as by human nature itself? Think about how early we begin learning what relationships are supposed to look like. Before many of us understand economics, politics, biology, or psychology, we have already absorbed ideas about romance. We watch stories in which two people meet, fall in love, overcome obstacles, become exclusive, and live happily ever after. We hear songs about jealousy, longing, betrayal, possession, and devotion. We watch characters treat intense desire as evidence of destiny. Eventually, these stories can become invisible. We stop noticing that they are stories. We simply assume that this is what love is. But human beings are not simple characters in a romantic script. We are social animals with complicated emotional systems, competing motivations, long memories, powerful imaginations, and an extraordinary ability to adapt to different environments. We can crave closeness and independence at the same time. We can want stability and novelty. We can feel deeply attached to someone while also noticing another person. We can experience jealousy without wanting to control anyone. We can feel secure in one relationship and anxious in another. None of this automatically tells us what we should do. It tells us that the inner world of a human being is more complicated than the stories we often use to describe it. And that complexity is not something to fear. It is something to understand. One of the most damaging habits in modern life is the tendency to interpret every complicated feeling as a command. We feel something, and immediately we assume we must act on it. We feel attraction, so we assume we must pursue it. We feel jealousy, so we assume someone must be doing something wrong. We feel boredom, so we assume the relationship has failed. We feel insecurity, so we assume our partner must provide constant reassurance. We feel financial anxiety, so we panic and make impulsive money decisions. But a feeling is not an instruction. It is information. Sometimes it is useful information. Sometimes it is distorted by fear, past experience, exhaustion, social conditioning, or incomplete knowledge. The mature person learns to listen without automatically obeying. This distinction between feeling and action may be one of the most important forms of freedom a human being can develop. You can feel anger without becoming cruel. You can feel desire without becoming reckless. You can feel jealousy without becoming controlling. You can feel fear without allowing fear to make every decision. You can feel the temptation to spend money without reaching for your credit card. You can experience uncertainty without immediately demanding certainty from everyone around you. There is a small space between what happens inside you and what you choose to do with it. Learning to inhabit that space is a form of wisdom. Here is a principle I want you to remember. An impulse is a messenger, not a master. The impulse may be telling you something important, but you are still responsible for deciding what happens next. This is particularly valuable when thinking about human sexuality because desire can be extraordinarily powerful. It can influence attention, imagination, behavior, confidence, and even the way we interpret other people's actions. But desire alone cannot tell us whether a choice is wise, ethical, mutually wanted, or consistent with our long-term values. Those questions require reflection. The same is true with money. Financial freedom is rarely achieved by obeying every impulse. Imagine someone who earns a good income but spends whenever they feel stressed. Their emotional state controls their financial decisions. Another person may constantly compare themselves with friends and buy things to maintain an image. They may technically have freedom to purchase whatever they want, but their behavior is controlled by social pressure. A third person may be terrified of losing money and therefore refuse every reasonable opportunity to invest in their future. In each case, the problem is not merely mathematics, it is psychology. Money reveals something important about human behavior. We often make decisions based on emotions and then create rational explanations afterward. We buy something because it makes us feel successful, and then we explain why it was a sensible purchase. We stay in a poor investment because admitting a mistake hurts our pride, and then we search for evidence that the investment will recover. We spend to impress people whose opinions we barely value, and then call it keeping up. Relationships can work in exactly the same way. We may become attached to an interpretation of a partner's behavior and then search for evidence that confirms what we already believe. This is why intellectual humility is so important. You should be able to say, "Maybe I am wrong." Those four words can save you from enormous trouble. Maybe your partner is not rejecting you. Perhaps they are exhausted. Maybe your friend is not jealous. Perhaps they are worried. Maybe your attraction does not mean you have found your soulmate. Perhaps you are experiencing novelty. Maybe your jealousy does not mean your relationship is threatened. Perhaps it is connected to an old wound. Maybe your financial situation is not hopeless. Perhaps you simply have never looked carefully at the numbers. Maybe the cultural rule you inherited is not a universal law. The willingness to consider alternative explanations is a powerful intellectual habit. It allows us to move from reaction to investigation. And investigation matters because human beings are extraordinarily good at creating stories. When we do not know why someone behaved a certain way, our minds hate the empty space, we fill it. If our partner does not respond to a message, we may create an entire narrative before they have even had a chance to explain. If a friend succeeds financially, we may assume they were lucky, connected, privileged, or dishonest. If someone appears extremely confident, we may assume their life is perfect. We rarely have access to the complete story. The same problem occurs when we think about human nature. We observe a behavior and immediately want a simple explanation. People are naturally selfish. People are naturally monogamous. People are naturally promiscuous. Men are like this. Women are like that. Such statements can feel satisfying because they reduce complexity. But satisfying explanations are not necessarily accurate explanations. Human beings vary enormously. Culture matters. Environment matters. Individual experience matters. Social structures matter. Biology matters, and the interaction among all of these factors is often more interesting than any single explanation. We should therefore be cautious about using evolutionary language as an excuse for behavior. Saying that something may have evolutionary roots does not mean it is inevitable or desirable. Human beings evolved to survive in environments that were dramatically different from modern cities. We carry ancient biological tendencies into a world of smartphones, artificial lighting, processed food, global economies, social media, and unprecedented access to strangers. Our biology did not suddenly disappear because technology changed. But neither are we helpless prisoners of ancient impulses. We are adaptable. That adaptability is one of our defining characteristics. Human beings can live in dramatically different climates. We can eat different foods. We can learn different languages. We can create different family structures. We can organize societies in countless ways. We can adopt new technologies within a generation. We can change social norms. We can consciously teach ourselves habits that our ancestors never needed. That means there is a danger in saying, "This is natural, therefore this is what we should do." Nature is not a moral instruction manual. A behavior can be biologically possible without being personally wise. A tendency can exist without needing to be acted upon, and a cultural practice can be widespread without being universal. The more useful question is not simply, "Is this natural?" The better questions are, what happens when people behave this way? Under what circumstances does it work? What risks does it create? What values does it support? What consequences follow? And is it right for the people involved? Those questions bring us back to agency. Agency means that we are not merely passengers in our own lives. We can examine our tendencies. We can negotiate our relationships. We can decide our boundaries. We can create agreements. We can revise those agreements when circumstances change. We can decide how much risk we are willing to accept. We can seek professional advice. We can choose whether a particular lifestyle supports our values. That does not make us completely independent of biology or society. It means we participate in shaping the way those forces influence us. And there is a beautiful parallel with financial planning. Your financial circumstances may be influenced by where you were born, the opportunities available to you, your education, economic conditions, family responsibilities, and unexpected events. You cannot control all of those variables, but you can control some decisions. You can learn. You can budget. You can reduce unnecessary expenses. You can develop valuable skills. You can save. You can invest according to your circumstances and risk tolerance. You can seek professional guidance. You can make a plan. Financial freedom rarely begins with enormous wealth. It often begins with awareness. The same is true of personal freedom. Awareness is the first asset. If you do not know what you are feeling, you cannot manage it effectively. If you do not understand your financial situation, you cannot manage it effectively. If you do not understand your relationship patterns, you may repeatedly recreate the same problems. If you do not know your values, you may spend your life fulfilling other people's expectations. So begin with awareness. Ask yourself what you actually believe. Then ask where that belief came from. Who taught it to you? Was it your family, your religion, your culture, your friends, a movie, social media, a painful experience, a fear? Was it based on evidence, or simply repetition? And perhaps most importantly, does it still serve you? You may discover that some of your beliefs are deeply valuable. Keep them. You may discover that others need refinement. Refine them. You may discover that some were never really yours at all. Let them go. This process can be uncomfortable because identity is involved. When we question our beliefs, it can feel as if we are questioning ourselves. But growth requires us to separate identity from certainty. You are not required to remain loyal to every belief you have ever held simply because you once believed it sincerely. You are allowed to become more informed. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to discover that your younger self misunderstood something, and your younger self deserves compassion for that. We all begin with incomplete information. Think about how financial knowledge develops. A teenager may believe that earning a salary means they are financially successful. Later they discover taxes, inflation, debt, investing, opportunity cost, and retirement planning. The definition of wealth becomes more sophisticated. They do not need to hate their younger self for not knowing these things. They simply learn. Relationships work the same way. Perhaps your first experience of love taught you that jealousy was romantic. Later you learned that constant surveillance is exhausting. Perhaps you once believed that arguing meant a relationship was failing. Later you discovered that respectful disagreement can be healthy. Perhaps you thought being independent meant never needing anyone. Later you learned that healthy relationships involve mutual support. Perhaps you thought commitment meant giving up your identity. Later you realize that commitment can coexist with individuality. Growth is the process of replacing simplistic ideas with more accurate ones. And as we grow, we can begin to recognize something remarkable about cooperation. The human world was not built by isolated individuals. Every modern convenience depends on thousands or millions of people coordinating their efforts. Your food, electricity, transportation, medicine, education, communication, and financial systems all exist because humans cooperate at enormous scales. Cooperation is not the opposite of individuality. It can be the foundation that makes individuality possible. A person with supportive relationships may have more confidence to pursue an ambitious career. A person with a reliable community may recover more effectively from hardship. A person with financial reserves may be able to leave an unhealthy environment. A person with trusted friends may be less vulnerable to isolation. A person with a loving family may have emotional resources that money cannot purchase. This is why social capital matters. We often talk about financial capital, but human beings also possess networks of trust, knowledge, goodwill, friendship, reputation, and mutual support. These resources can influence opportunities and resilience just as dramatically as money can. One of the smartest investments you can make is therefore not always an investment account. Sometimes it is a relationship. Call someone you care about. Keep your promises. Listen carefully. Help when you can. Allow people to help you. Build a reputation for honesty. Learn how to disagree without destroying connection. These habits create a kind of wealth that does not appear on a bank statement, and yet, we should not romanticize cooperation. Human beings are capable of extraordinary generosity, but also manipulation, exploitation, and cruelty. Trust should not mean abandoning judgment. Cooperation works best when it is supported by boundaries, accountability, and mutual respect. This is another place where financial principles provide useful guidance. You would not hand over your life savings to someone simply because they are charming. You would ask questions. You would understand the risks. You would verify information. You would create appropriate safeguards. Relationships deserve trust, but trust should be built through behavior. Someone who repeatedly respects your boundaries is demonstrating something. Someone who repeatedly violates them is demonstrating something. 2. Someone who tells the truth when honesty is difficult is demonstrating something. Someone who changes their story whenever accountability arrives is demonstrating something. Pay attention to patterns. A single moment can be misleading. Patterns reveal more. This is true in investing as well. One good month does not prove that an investment strategy is sound. One bad month does not necessarily prove that it is terrible. You examine the pattern, the underlying fundamentals, the risk, the context, and the long-term objective. In relationships, we should similarly examine patterns of respect, communication, honesty, affection, conflict, and responsibility. And here is a powerful principle. Judge a relationship by the pattern it creates, not merely by the intensity of individual moments. Intensity can be seductive. A dramatic apology can feel powerful. A passionate reunion can feel unforgettable. A sudden financial windfall can feel like success, but sustainable well-being is usually quieter. It looks like consistency. It looks like reliability. It looks like keeping promises. It looks like having difficult conversations before they become crises. It looks like saving money even when nobody applauds. It looks like respecting boundaries even when you are disappointed. It looks like choosing long-term stability over short-term applause. This is why the pursuit of freedom requires patience. We live in a culture that loves immediacy, immediate entertainment, immediate communication, immediate purchases, immediate validation, immediate answers. but the most valuable. Things in life rarely appear immediately. Trust takes time. Skill takes time. Health habits take time. Financial wealth takes time. Emotional maturity takes time. Strong communities take time, and meaningful relationships take time. The desire for immediate certainty can make us vulnerable to people who sell simple answers. If someone tells you that they can explain all human behavior in one sentence, be cautious. If someone promises effortless wealth, be cautious. If someone claims to know exactly what every man or every woman wants, be cautious. Complexity is not always a problem to be eliminated. Sometimes complexity is simply reality. The goal is not to make reality simple. The goal is to become capable of navigating it. That is why curiosity is more valuable than certainty. Certainty closes the door. Curiosity opens it. A curious person can learn from anthropology, psychology, biology, history, economics, personal experience, and the experiences of other people. They can hold to possibilities in their mind without immediately demanding that one be destroyed. They can say, "This is what I currently believe, but I am willing to examine it." That mindset creates resilience, and resilience is another form of wealth. Financial resilience means you can absorb a setback without your entire life collapsing. Emotional resilience means you can experience disappointment without losing your identity. Relational resilience means you can have conflict without assuming the relationship must end. Intellectual resilience means you can encounter information that challenges your beliefs without immediately becoming defensive. The strongest people are not those who never encounter uncertainty. They are those who can remain thoughtful while uncertainty is present. So as we continue exploring human sexuality and relationships, I want you to resist the temptation to search for a single rule that explains everything. Instead, look for patterns, look for context, look for variation. Look at the difference between desire and behavior, biology and culture, individuality and cooperation, freedom and responsibility. And above all, remember that understanding human nature should make us more compassionate, not more cynical. When we recognize that everyone carries complicated emotions, hidden fears, competing desires, and imperfect knowledge, we can become slower to judge. That does not mean abandoning standards. It means understanding that accountability and compassion can coexist. You can say, "This behavior is harmful," while still believing that the person can change. You can say, "This relationship is not healthy for me," while still wishing the other person well. You can say, "I made a poor decision," without deciding that you are a poor person. You can say, "I want something different," without declaring that everyone else is wrong. This is maturity. And perhaps maturity is ultimately the ability to hold complexity without surrendering your values. As you build your financial future, do the same thing. Do not chase money simply because society tells you that money equals success. Ask what money is supposed to accomplish. Is it security, freedom, time, education, family support, philanthropy, travel, creative independence? Once you know the purpose, the financial strategy becomes clear. The same is true of relationships. Do not pursue a relationship simply because being single makes you feel socially inadequate. Ask what kind of connection you actually want. What does partnership mean to you? What boundaries matter? What kind of communication do you need? What responsibilities are you willing to share? What values do you want to protect? When you know the purpose, you can design the structure. That is a financial freedom principle worth carrying everywhere. Do not build the structure before deciding what the structure is meant to protect. A budget should protect your priorities. Savings should protect your future options. Insurance should protect against meaningful risks. A relationship agreement should protect mutual expectations and trust. Boundaries should protect dignity and well-being. And personal values should protect the direction of your life. Once you see life this way, freedom stops looking like rebellion. It starts looking like design. You are designing how you spend your time. You are designing how you use your money. You are designing how you communicate. You are designing what you will tolerate. You are designing what kind of relationships you will cultivate. You are designing what kind of person you want to become. And the most powerful realization is that you do not have to design everything perfectly on the first attempt. You can adjust. You can learn. You can begin again. You can change the plan when reality changes. That is not failure. That is intelligence. So carry this thought forward. The goal is not to escape human nature. The goal is to understand it well enough to make conscious choices within it. We are complicated creatures. We want security and adventure. Connection and autonomy, stability and novelty, recognition and privacy. We want to belong, but we also want to be ourselves. Perhaps that tension is not a flaw. Perhaps it is part of what makes us human. And if we can learn to navigate that tension with honesty, respect, curiosity, and responsibility, we can build relationships that are not merely performances of what society expects. We can build lives that are more intentional. That is where the real journey begins. Not by asking, what are humans supposed to be? But by asking, what can I learn about myself, about other people, and about the world that will help me make wiser choices? Because every answer you discover becomes another tool. Every assumption you examine becomes another layer of freedom. Every financial habit you improve creates another option. Every healthy boundary you establish creates another layer of self-respect. Every honest conversation creates another possibility for connection. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, those small choices begin to compound. Money compounds, knowledge compounds, habits compound. Trust compounds, character compounds. And so does freedom. The life you eventually experience will be shaped not by one dramatic decision, but by the accumulation of countless small decisions made when nobody was watching. Choose those decisions carefully. Your future is listening. There is a moment in almost every person's life when the difference between what we were taught and what we actually experience becomes impossible to ignore. Perhaps it happens when someone falls in love and discovers that love does not erase insecurity. Perhaps it happens when a person realizes that being deeply committed to someone does not make every other attractive person in the world disappear. Perhaps it happens when jealousy arrives unexpectedly, or when the excitement of novelty collides with the comfort of familiarity. Or perhaps it happens much later, when someone looks at the life they built and quietly asks, did I choose this because it was right for me, or because I never imagined I was allowed to choose anything else? These questions can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is sometimes the beginning of understanding. If we are willing to examine the assumptions beneath our relationships, our desires, and our definitions of success, we may discover that freedom does not require us to reject everything we inherited. It requires us to understand what we inherited well enough to decide what deserves to continue. One of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior is expectation. We do not simply respond to the world as it is. We respond to the world as we believe it should be. That distinction matters enormously. If you believe that a loving partner should never experience attraction to another person, then the discovery of attraction may feel like a crisis. If you believe that jealousy is proof of love, you may interpret anxiety as romance. If you believe that successful people must constantly display wealth, you may interpret financial pressure as evidence that you are moving forward. If you believe that being independent means never needing anyone, you may reject support even when you desperately need it. In each case, the expectation becomes a lens, and the lens changes what we see. This is why examining expectations is so important. An expectation can be useful when it helps people coordinate their lives. It becomes dangerous when it turns into an unquestioned demand that reality conform to it. Human beings are not machines designed to fit perfectly into predetermined categories. We are living systems. We change with age, experience, environment, relationships, health, opportunity, and knowledge. The person you are at 20 may not want the same things at 40. The relationship that feels right in one season of life may require a different arrangement in another. A financial strategy that works when your income is growing may need to change when your responsibilities increase. Flexibility is not a betrayal of your identity. Sometimes it is evidence that your identity is alive. Consider the way we often talk about commitment. We sometimes imagine commitment as the disappearance of uncertainty. Once someone has committed, we expect every question to be answered, every temptation to vanish, every doubt to disappear, and every future decision to become obvious. But real commitment may be better understood as a continuing decision to participate honestly in a shared life. It is not the absence of complexity. It is the willingness to navigate complexity responsibly. Two people can be committed and still have difficult conversations. They can disagree. They can experience changes in desire. They can encounter periods of stress. They can discover things about themselves that they did not understand when the relationship began. Commitment does not make people static. In fact, one of the greatest mistakes we can make is confusing stability with stillness. A stable relationship can change. A stable financial life can evolve. A stable identity can grow. Stability does not mean nothing moves. It means the system can absorb movement without collapsing. Think about a tree. Its roots provide stability, but the tree itself is constantly changing. It grows, loses leaves, produces new branches, responds to weather, and adapts to its environment. Its stability comes partly from its capacity to change. Human beings are similar. We need roots, but we also need growth. The same principle applies to financial freedom. People sometimes believe financial security means reaching a point where nothing ever changes. But the world changes. Inflation changes. Careers change. Family responsibilities change. Markets change. Technology changes. Health changes. A financially intelligent person does not demand that the world remain stable. They build enough flexibility to respond when it does not. They maintain reserves. They manage debt. They continue learning. They develop multiple skills. They avoid putting every resource into one fragile assumption. That is a principle worth carrying into relationships as well. Do not build your life around the assumption that nothing will change. Build it around the confidence that you can adapt when change arrives. Adaptability is one of the great forms of security. And when we talk about human sexuality, adaptability becomes especially interesting because our experiences can be influenced by both biological tendencies and cultural environments. People can have strong desires, but the meaning they assign to those desires is often learned. The same behavior can be interpreted differently in different cultures. Expectations about courtship, marriage, gender, family, fidelity, and intimacy have varied enormously across human societies. That diversity does not prove that every arrangement works equally well. It does, however, remind us that there is no single simple script that can explain every human relationship. Human beings are capable of forming different kinds of social bonds because we are extraordinarily flexible creatures. We cooperate with strangers, form friendships, create families, build communities, and establish long-term partnerships. We can be deeply attached to particular individuals while also benefiting from broader social networks. We are capable of loyalty and novelty, generosity and competition, independence and dependence. The interesting question is not which one of these qualities is the real human nature. The interesting question is how they interact. Imagine a person who believes that humans are fundamentally selfish. Every generous action becomes suspicious. If someone helps them, they wonder what that person wants in return. If their partner gives them freedom, they wonder whether the partner has stopped caring. If a colleague shares information, they assume there must be a hidden advantage. Eventually, the belief itself begins to shape the person's world. They become defensive, and their defensiveness makes others less trusting. The original assumption becomes a self-fulfilling pattern. Now imagine someone who believes that cooperation is possible, that understands that boundaries matter. They can accept help without assuming manipulation. They can trust without abandoning judgment. They can give without allowing themselves to be exploited. They can negotiate. They can repair. They can say thank you. They can say no. That person is not naive. They are discerning. And discernment may be more useful than cynicism. Cynicism says, everyone is selfish, so trust nobody. Naivety says, everyone is good, so trust everyone. Wisdom says, people are complicated. Watch what they consistently do. That principle works beautifully in finance. You do not need to assume that every financial professional is dishonest, nor should you assume every financial professional is acting entirely in your interest. You investigate. You ask questions. You understand fees. You compare alternatives. You verify credentials. You make decisions based on your circumstances. Trust should not eliminate. Thinking. And thinking should not eliminate trust. The healthiest systems contain both. This is particularly important when discussing relationships because the language of love can sometimes obscure the language of negotiation. We are taught that true love should be effortless, that the right person will simply know what we need, and that asking for what we want somehow makes the relationship less romantic. But people cannot read minds. Even people who love each other deeply can misunderstand one another. Healthy relationships require communication. What does commitment mean to each person? What does privacy mean? What are the expectations around exclusivity? How should money be handled? How much independence does each person need? How are disagreements addressed? What boundaries are important? How should major decisions be made? What happens when circumstances change? These questions may sound less romantic than a love song, but they are often more important than a love song. Romance can create emotional momentum. Communication creates coordination. And coordination is one of the foundations of civilization. Think about an orchestra. Hundreds of individual movements become music because people share a framework. The musicians do not become identical. They remain individuals, each with their own instruments and abilities, but they coordinate. A relationship can work similarly. Two people do not need to become one person. They need enough shared understanding to move through life without constantly colliding. This brings us to another important distinction. Equality does not mean sameness. Two people can have different personalities, interests, incomes, strengths, and preferences while still treating one another as equals. Equality is about dignity and agency, not identical characteristics. In financial life, this means a partnership does not necessarily require identical incomes. In a relationship, it does not require identical desires. What matters is whether both people have a meaningful voice in decisions that affect them. That principle becomes especially important when money enters a relationship. Money is not simply currency. It can represent security, independence, power, freedom, status, generosity, fear, and control. Two people can earn the same amount of money and experience it completely differently. One may see money as a tool. Another may see it as protection against abandonment. One may enjoy spending. Another may feel safe only when saving. One may have grown up in abundance. Another may have experienced scarcity. These histories come into relationships, and if we pretend money is merely arithmetic, we miss the psychology underneath it. The same thing happens with sexuality. A person's attitudes toward intimacy be shaped by family expectations, culture, religion, past experiences, education, insecurity, affection, fear, and personal values. Two people can enter the same relationship with completely different internal maps. The answer is not to pretend the maps are identical. The answer is to compare them. Here is what intimacy means to me. Here is what commitment means to me. Here is what makes me feel secure. Here is what makes me uncomfortable. Here is what I need to feel respected. These conversations require courage because they expose vulnerability. But vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. Properly expressed, it is one of the ways people create genuine connection. Of course, vulnerability should not mean telling everyone everything. Privacy is legitimate. Boundaries are legitimate. You do not owe every person access to every part of yourself. But in relationships where deep trust is expected, honest communication becomes essential. A powerful principle is this: the strongest connection is not created when two people hide their complexity. It is created when two people can reveal complexity without losing respect. That is a very different model of intimacy from the fantasy that love means finding someone who perfectly completes you. No human being can complete another person. A partner can enrich your life. A friend can support you. A family can give you belonging. A community can give you strength. But your identity cannot responsibly be outsourced to another human being. This matters because dependence can become dangerous when it is combined with fear. If someone believes, without this relationship, I have nothing, they may tolerate behavior they would otherwise reject. They may surrender financial control. They may abandon friendships. They may stop pursuing their ambitions. They may silence their boundaries. The relationship becomes their entire economic and emotional infrastructure. That is too much weight for any one relationship to carry. Build multiple forms of support. Develop skills. Maintain friendships. Understand your finances. Take care of your health. Cultivate interests outside the relationship. Keep learning. These things do not weaken love. They can strengthen it by making love a choice rather than a survival strategy. Financial independence is especially powerful here. You do not need to become wealthy before you can be independent. Independence can begin with understanding. Know your income. Know your expenses. Know your debts. Know what you own. Build emergency savings where possible. Learn marketable skills. Avoid unnecessary financial commitments. Be cautious about allowing another person complete control over your resources. The objective is not suspicion. The objective is resilience. Because life can change suddenly. A relationship can end. A job can disappear. A health problem can arrive. A family responsibility can emerge. An economy can weaken. A person who has built some financial resilience has more room to respond. And that brings us to a financial freedom principle that deserves to be repeated. The value of money is not only what it can buy, it is the choices it can preserve. Savings can preserve the choice to leave a toxic workplace. Skills can preserve the choice to change careers. An emergency fund can preserve the choice to handle a crisis without panic. A manageable lifestyle can preserve the choice to work less. A diversified income strategy, when appropriate, can preserve flexibility. Money becomes powerful when it creates options rather than obligations. The same can be said of knowledge. Knowledge creates options. If you understand your health, you can ask better questions. If you understand relationships, you can recognize patterns. If you understand your emotions, you can respond rather than react. If you understand money, you can make more informed choices. If you understand human diversity, you may become less threatened by differences. That is why education is an investment with extraordinary potential returns. You can lose money. You can lose possessions. You can even lose opportunities. But knowledge can often be carried forward and applied again. Of course, knowledge is not enough. A person can know exactly what they should do and still fail to do it. This is where habits enter the story. A person may know that saving is important, but continue spending impulsively. A person may know that communication matters, but avoid difficult conversations. A person may know that jealousy can damage relationships, but still react from fear. A person may know that sleep matters, but repeatedly sacrifice it. Knowledge tells you the direction. Habits move you there, and habits are built through repetition. If you want financial freedom, automate what you can. Make saving a default rather than a monthly emotional decision. Review expenses regularly. Create systems that reduce the need for constant willpower. If you want healthier relationships, create habits of communication. Ask questions. Express appreciation. Discuss problems before resentment becomes enormous. Make room for individuality. Learn how to repair after conflict. If you want greater emotional freedom, practice noticing your reactions. Before responding to a difficult message, pause. Before making an expensive purchase, wait. Before accusing someone, ask for clarification. Before assuming the worst, gather information. Small pauses can prevent large mistakes. And this is why patience is such a powerful form of wealth. Patience allows compound growth. It allows trust to develop. It allows skills to deepen. It allows investments to mature. It allows emotions to settle enough for thoughtful decisions. It allows people to discover whether a relationship has substance beyond initial excitement. The world often rewards speed, but life frequently rewards consistency. Consider the difference between excitement and satisfaction. Excitement is intense, immediate, and often temporary. Satisfaction can be quieter. It may come from knowing that your life is aligned with your values. A healthy relationship may not feel dramatic every day. A healthy financial plan may not make you feel rich every morning. A healthy lifestyle may not produce instant transformation. But over time, these quiet choices accumulate, and accumulation is one of the central principles of financial freedom. You do not need to become wealthy overnight. You need to stop destroying the future for the sake of the present. That principle applies beyond money. Do not sacrifice long-term trust for temporary validation. Do not sacrifice health for constant convenience. Do not sacrifice dignity to avoid a difficult conversation. Do not sacrifice your entire identity to preserve a relationship. Do not sacrifice your financial future simply to appear successful today. Ask yourself what your present choices are purchasing from your future. Every decision has a price. Sometimes the price is money. Sometimes it is time. Sometimes it is trust. Sometimes it is opportunity. Sometimes it is peace. The wise person learns to look beyond the immediate reward. This does not mean living without pleasure. Quite the opposite. A life entirely focused on the future can become another form of imprisonment. You should enjoy the present. You should experience affection, laughter, friendship, adventure, creativity, and celebration. Financial freedom is not about turning every moment into a spreadsheet. It is about making sure that today's pleasures do not continuously destroy tomorrow's possibilities. The same balance applies to sexuality and relationships. Desire is part of life. Pleasure is part of life. Intimacy can be deeply meaningful, but pleasure becomes more sustainable when it exists alongside respect, consent, communication, and responsibility. The goal is not repression. The goal is integration. We do not need to divide human beings into rational and sexual creatures, as if these were separate species living inside one body. We are one complicated organism. Our emotions, bodies, memories, beliefs, relationships, and environments interact constantly. Understanding that complexity can make us kinder to ourselves. Perhaps you have experienced a desire that surprised you. Perhaps you have felt jealous even though you consider yourself rational. Perhaps you have loved someone and still needed personal space. Perhaps you have wanted independence while simultaneously wanting deep connection. None of these experiences automatically defines you. You are not every thought you have. You are not every fantasy. You are not every emotion. You are the person who decides how to respond. That is where character lives. Character is revealed not by the absence of difficult impulses, but by what we do with them. The same principle applies to wealth. You may want to spend. You may want to take risks. You may want to impress people. You may want immediate comfort. None of these desires makes you financially irresponsible by itself. Your pattern of behavior determines the result, and patterns can change. This is perhaps the most hopeful idea in our entire discussion. You are not permanently trapped by the person you have been. If you have been impulsive, you can become more deliberate. If you have been avoidant, you can learn communication. If you have been financially careless, you can become financially organized. If you have confused jealousy with love, you can learn a healthier understanding of attachment. If you have allowed other people to define your values, you can begin defining them yourself. Change rarely arrives as a dramatic transformation. It usually arrives as a series of small decisions, one honest conversation, one boundary, one saved paycheck. One difficult apology, one evening spent learning instead of scrolling, one moment when you paused before reacting. One decision to seek help. One decision to tell the truth. One decision to stop pretending. These moments seem insignificant while they are happening, but life is made of insignificant moments, and what you repeatedly do with those moments becomes your identity. So, do not underestimate small actions. A person does not become financially secure because of one spectacular saving decision. They become secure through thousands of ordinary choices. A person does not create a healthy relationship through one romantic gesture. They create it through repeated respect. A person does not become emotionally mature after reading one book. They practice maturity every time they experience a difficult emotion. A person does not become free because someone grants them freedom. They build freedom by developing the resources and courage to make conscious choices. That is why I want you to think of freedom as a portfolio. Do not invest everything in money. Do not invest everything in romance. Do not invest everything in career status. Do not invest everything in social approval. Build multiple forms of wealth. Build financial wealth. Build physical health. Build emotional resilience. Build intellectual curiosity. Build meaningful relationships. Build practical skills. Build a reputation for integrity. Build the ability to be alone without feeling incomplete. Build the ability to cooperate without disappearing into another person. These assets reinforce each other, and when they do, something remarkable happens. You become less desperate for any single person or institution to give you everything. You can love someone without needing them to solve your entire life. You can work without expecting your career to define your worth. You can earn money without treating money as your identity. You can experience desire without allowing it to control you. You can experience fear without treating fear as prophecy. You can experience uncertainty without demanding that everyone else eliminate it. That is maturity. And perhaps it is also the beginning of genuine freedom, because the freest person is not necessarily the person with the fewest constraints. The freest person may be the one who understands their constraints clearly and knows how to make meaningful choices within them. We all have constraints. Biology. Culture. History. Responsibilities. Money. Health. Time. Other people's choices. We cannot control everything, but we can influence more than we sometimes believe. And the first step is becoming curious about the forces shaping us. Ask where your assumptions came from. Ask whether your habits serve you. Ask what your emotions are trying to tell you. Ask whether your relationship agreements are explicit or merely assumed. Ask whether your financial decisions reflect your values. Ask whether your definition of success was chosen or inherited. These questions can be unsettling. Good. A question does not have to be comfortable to be valuable. Sometimes the question is the beginning of a better life. So as we continue this exploration, resist easy answers. Resist the temptation to reduce human beings to a single instinct, a single gender, a single relationship model, or a single evolutionary story. We are more complicated than that, and complexity is not an enemy. It is an invitation. An invitation to learn. An invitation to listen. An invitation to question. An invitation to become more intentional. Remember this: you do not gain freedom by pretending your nature does not exist. You gain freedom by understanding your nature and deciding which parts deserve your obedience. That principle reaches far beyond sexuality. It belongs to money. It belongs to ambition. It belongs to relationships. It belongs to every area in which an impulse meets a long-term goal. And if you can learn to create that small space between desire and decision, you gain one of the most valuable forms of power available to a human being: the power to choose, not perfectly. Not always, but deliberately. And deliberate choices, repeated over time, become a life that does not merely happen to you, a life you participate in creating. There comes a point in every serious conversation about relationships when we have to move beyond the question of what people feel and begin asking what they choose to do with those feelings. It is easy to talk about attraction, desire, jealousy, attachment, novelty, and love as though these forces arrive with instructions attached. But human beings are not simply pushed around by their impulses. We can reflect, negotiate, communicate, delay gratification, establish boundaries, and make promises. We can recognize a desire without acting on it. We can experience jealousy without turning it into control. We can feel uncertainty without demanding that another person surrender their freedom simply to make us comfortable. This ability to pause between emotion and action is one of the great capacities of the human mind, and it is also one of the foundations of a genuinely free life. Think about how different life becomes when we stop asking, "What am I feeling?" and begin asking a second question, "What do I want my behavior to say about the person I am becoming?" The first question about awareness. The second is about character. Both matter. A feeling can be completely real, while the behavior inspires can still be unwise. Anger can be real, without cruelty being justified. Desire can be real, without betrayal being inevitable. Fear can be real, without controlling another person being acceptable. Loneliness can be real, without choosing an unhealthy relationship simply to escape it. The emotion deserves acknowledgement, but the action deserves responsibility. This is especially important because modern culture often confuses authenticity with immediacy. We hear that we should be ourselves, and sometimes that phrase is interpreted as "do whatever you feel." But authenticity is not the same as impulsiveness. If anything, genuine authenticity requires knowing yourself well enough to distinguish between a temporary impulse and a deeply held value. You may feel the urge to spend money because you had a difficult day. You may feel the urge to send an angry message because someone disappointed you. You may feel the urge to abandon a relationship because the excitement has faded. You may feel the urge to make a dramatic career decision because you are frustrated. Being authentic does not require obeying every one of these impulses. It requires becoming honest about them and then deciding what deserves your action. Here is a principle worth carrying with you. Freedom is not the ability to obey every desire. Freedom is the ability to choose which desires deserve your life. That distinction can transform the way we think about financial independence. Imagine two people with the same income. One earns well but spends impulsively, accumulates unnecessary debt, and constantly needs the next purchase to feel successful. The other earns the same amount but keeps expenses under control, builds savings, invests thoughtfully according to their circumstances, and understands that money is a resource rather than a scoreboard. On paper, they earn the same. In reality, they possess very different degrees of freedom. The first person may have more possessions but fewer choices. The second may have fewer possessions but more options. This is why financial freedom should never be reduced to a number. Wealth can be measured in dollars, but freedom is measured in choices. If your lifestyle requires every paycheck simply to maintain itself, your income may be high while your freedom remains low. If you can withstand an unexpected expense, take time to reconsider a career decision, or walk away from an arrangement that violates your values because you have built some financial resilience. You possess something more valuable than status. The same idea applies to relationships. A person who believes, "I cannot survive without this relationship," may feel trapped even if their partner is not explicitly controlling them. Emotional dependence can create invisible chains. That does not mean needing other people is weakness. Human beings are social creatures. We need friendship, affection, family, community, and support. The goal is not to become emotionally isolated. The goal is to cultivate enough internal and external resources that connection becomes a choice rather than a prison. A healthy relationship can say, "I love you, I need you in meaningful ways, and I am still responsible for myself." That is different from saying, "You are responsible for my entire identity, happiness, security, and sense of worth." No single person can carry that burden indefinitely. This is where the idea of interdependence becomes so important. Independence is valuable because it gives people agency. Connection is valuable because it gives people support. Interdependence brings the two together. Two people can support one another without erasing themselves. They can share resources without surrendering all autonomy. They can make decisions together while still maintaining individual interests and identities. They can create a partnership in which neither person needs to dominate for the relationship to feel secure. The ability to cooperate without disappearing is one of the great arts of adult life. It is also one of the great lessons of financial freedom. If your financial strategy requires you to depend entirely on one source of income, one employer, one investment, or one person's generosity, your vulnerability may be greater than you realize. Resilience comes from building layers of protection. Emergency savings can provide breathing room. Skills can create career flexibility. Responsible investing can help build long-term resources. Insurance can help manage certain risks. Strong relationships can provide emotional and practical support. None of these guarantees safety, but together they can increase your ability to respond to uncertainty, and uncertainty is unavoidable. We sometimes imagine that if we make the perfect decision, nothing will go wrong, but life does not work that way. You can make an excellent decision and still encounter bad luck. You can be careful and still experience illness. You can communicate honestly and still be misunderstood. You can save money and still face an unexpected expense. You can love someone sincerely and still discover that your lives are moving in different directions. The purpose of wisdom is not to eliminate uncertainty. It is to become resilient enough to navigate it. That principle changes how we approach relationships. Instead of demanding certainty, we can develop trust. Trust does not mean believing that nothing difficult will ever happen. Trust means believing that difficult things can be addressed honestly. You do not need a guarantee that your partner will never change. You need confidence that if change arrives, the two of you can discuss it. You do not need a guarantee that you will never experience jealousy. You need the ability to talk about jealousy without turning it into surveillance or punishment. You do not need a guarantee that every conflict will disappear. You need skills for repairing conflict. This is why communication is not a decorative feature of a relationship. It is infrastructure. Imagine building a house with beautiful furniture but no foundation. From the outside, it may look impressive, but eventually the weaknesses become impossible to hide. Communication is part of the foundation. Without it, assumptions grow. Resentment accumulates. Small misunderstandings become major conflicts. People begin reacting to stories in their own head rather than information they have actually received. One of the most useful habits in any relationship is learning to replace assumptions with questions. Instead of, "You don't care about me," try, "I felt disconnected from you today. Can we talk about what happened?" Instead of, "You must be interested in someone else," try, "I'm feeling insecure, and I want to understand what is happening between us." Instead of, "You always waste money," try, "I notice that we have different attitudes towards spending. Can we agree on priorities?" Instead of, "You never listen," try, "I need to know that what I'm saying is being heard. Can we talk without interrupting each other?" These changes may sound small, but they alter the emotional architecture of a conversation. Accusations invite defense. Questions can invite information. And information is powerful. The same is true in finance. A person who avoids looking at their bank account because they are afraid of what they will discover is not protecting themselves. They are protecting their anxiety from reality. But reality becomes easier to manage when you know its numbers. Once you know what you earn, spend, owe, and own, you can make decisions. You may not like the numbers, but you can work with numbers you can see. Relationships are similar. You cannot solve a problem you refuse to name. If something is bothering you, acknowledge it. If expectations differ, discuss them. If boundaries are unclear, clarify them. If you have made a mistake, take responsibility. If you do not know what the other person means, ask. If you need professional help, seek it. There is strength in saying, "I don't know how to handle this alone." That sentence can save years of unnecessary suffering. Another important part of mature relationships is consent. Genuine intimacy cannot be built on pressure, manipulation, intimidation, or assumption. Consent is not merely the absence of resistance. It is meaningful willingness. It should be respected throughout an interaction, and it can be withdrawn. This is not a complicated philosophical principle. It is a basic recognition that another person is a person, not an object designed to satisfy your desires. That idea connects deeply with freedom. If you want your own choices to be respected, you must respect the choices of others. Personal freedom becomes sustainable when it is reciprocal. A society in which everyone demands freedom for themselves while denying it to everyone else cannot remain stable. The same is true of relationships. If one person expects privacy but demands access to the other's phone, there is an imbalance. If one person expects freedom to maintain friendships but tries to isolate the other, there is an imbalance. If one person expects financial independence but controls the household resources of the other, there is an imbalance. Healthy freedom requires mutuality, and mutuality requires boundaries. A boundary is not a punishment. It is a statement about what you will and will not participate in. I will not continue a conversation if I am being insulted. I need transparency around shared finances. I am not comfortable with this behavior. I need time alone. I will seek professional medical advice about my health, rather than relying on rumors. These are not acts of hostility. They are expressions of self-respect. Financial boundaries matter too. You can love someone and still refuse to take on debt you cannot afford. You can support a family member while recognizing that unlimited financial rescue may prevent them from becoming independent. You can share resources while maintaining clear agreements. Generosity is beautiful, but generosity without boundaries can become resentment. One of the most valuable financial principles is, give from strength, not from self-destruction. If helping someone requires you to destroy your own financial stability, you may eventually be unable to help anyone, including yourself. A strong financial foundation allows generosity to become sustainable. The same applies emotionally. You cannot constantly pour into everyone else while ignoring your own health and expect that exhaustion will somehow become love. Self-care is not selfishness when it preserves your ability to participate meaningfully in life. There is another concept worth examining: scarcity. Scarcity can shape both money and relationships in powerful ways. When people believe there is never enough, they become afraid of losing what they have. In financial life, scarcity can produce hoarding, panic, excessive risk aversion, or desperate speculation. In relationships, scarcity can produce possessiveness, comparison, and fear. If someone believes love is scarce, another person's attractiveness becomes a threat. If someone believes opportunity is scarce, another person's success becomes an insult. If someone believes money is scarce, every unexpected expense can feel catastrophic. Scarcity changes perception, but abundance must be understood carefully. Abundance does not mean believing there are infinite resources or that everyone can have everything they want. It means recognizing that not every situation is a zero-sum contest. One person's happiness does not automatically require another person's misery. One person's success does not necessarily diminish your own. A partner's independence does not necessarily reduce their love. A friend's achievement does not reduce your potential. This does not mean competition disappears. Competition exists. Resources can be limited. People can hurt one another. But if we interpret every human interaction through competition, we may overlook the enormous benefits of cooperation. Human civilization is built on cooperation. We exchange. We teach. We care for children. We share knowledge. We create institutions. We form friendships. We build businesses. We develop technologies. We coordinate enormous projects. The ability to cooperate may be one of the defining reasons our species has been able to create such complex societies. And cooperation begins with trust. Trust, however, is not blind faith. Trust can be earned, tested, repaired, and sometimes withdrawn. This is why patterns matter so much. Anyone can behave well for a moment. Sustainable trust comes from repeated behavior. A person who respects your boundaries when it is inconvenient is demonstrating character. A person who keeps promises when there is no audience is demonstrating character. A person who can admit a mistake without turning the blame onto everyone else is demonstrating character. Character is what remains when performance becomes inconvenient. This is true in finance too. Someone may make a lucky investment and appear brilliant, but one lucky outcome does not prove a durable strategy. Look at process, not just results. How did the decision get made? What risks were taken? Was the outcome repeatable? Was it luck or discipline? The same principle should guide how we evaluate ourselves. Do not judge your entire life by one failure. Do not judge your entire relationship by one difficult day. Do not judge your financial future by one bad year. Look at the process. Are you learning? Are you adapting? Are you taking responsibility? Are you becoming more thoughtful? Are you building better habits? Progress is often invisible before it becomes obvious. Consider compound interest. At first, the growth seems almost disappointing. You save a little, and nothing dramatic happens. Then the process continues. The gains begin producing gains. Eventually, the difference becomes enormous. Human development can compound in the same way. One honest conversation makes the next conversation easier. One healthy boundary builds confidence for the next boundary. 1 month of controlled spending teaches you that you can live with less. 1 year of saving creates a buffer. One new skill creates another career possibility. One repaired relationship teaches you that conflict does not always mean destruction. One act of courage makes the next act slightly easier. This is why you should never underestimate the first step. The first step rarely looks impressive. It may simply be opening the bank statement, making the appointment, starting the conversation, admitting the truth, writing down the debt. Saying no, asking for help, forgiving yourself. Beginning again. The first step is often quiet, but quiet steps can lead to loud results. There is also an important lesson in understanding the difference between novelty and value. New experiences can produce intense emotional responses because novelty captures attention. This happens in many areas of life. A new relationship can feel thrilling. A new job can feel exciting. A new purchase can produce a temporary rush. A new investment can create optimism. But novelty is not the same as quality. A new thing is not automatically a better thing. The excitement of novelty eventually fades, which does not mean the experience was meaningless. It means the brain adapts. Long-term satisfaction often depends on what remains after novelty declines. This is why relationships require more than attraction. Attraction can begin a story, but trust, respect, friendship, communication, compatibility, and shared values help determine whether the story can continue. And financial life requires more than income. A high income can be wonderful, but without discipline, lifestyle inflation can consume it. Someone can earn more every year and still feel permanently behind. The goal is not simply to increase what enters your life. The goal is to increase what remains available for the life you actually value. This is a powerful financial freedom principle. Do not measure progress only by how much you earn. Measure it by how much freedom your resources create. That freedom may mean time. It may mean flexibility. It may mean reduced anxiety. It may mean the ability to support someone you love. It may mean pursuing creative work. It may mean taking a break when your health requires it. It may mean refusing an opportunity that violates your principles. Money becomes meaningful when it serves life rather than replacing it, and relationships become meaningful when they enrich life rather than consume it. That is why we should be cautious about defining ourselves entirely through external roles. You are not only someone's partner, you are not only someone's employee. You are not only a parent, entrepreneur, investor, or provider. You are a whole person. Roles matter, but they are not the entire self. When a person builds their entire identity around one role, any threat to that role can feel like an existential crisis. If your identity is only successful professional, Losing a job may feel like losing yourself. If your identity is only perfect partner, relationship conflict may feel like proof that you are worthless. If your identity is only wealthy person, a financial setback can become unbearable. A broader identity creates resilience. You can say, I lost money, but I am still capable of learning. I made a relationship mistake, but I can still become a better person. I lost a job, but I still have skills. I experienced rejection, but I am still worthy of connection. This is not positive thinking for its own sake. It is perspective, and perspective is essential when dealing with the complexity of human behavior. We are all capable of contradiction. Someone can be generous in one situation and selfish in another. Someone can be brave at work and insecure in relationships. Someone can be financially disciplined and emotionally impulsive. Someone can be deeply loving and still have poor communication skills. People are not categories. They are patterns, and patterns can change. That may be the most encouraging truth of all. If your past behavior were destiny, there would be no reason to learn anything. Education would be pointless. Therapy would be pointless. Financial planning would be pointless. Habit formation would be pointless. But human beings can learn precisely because we are capable of changing our behavior in response to knowledge and experience. So do not ask only, who am I? Ask, who am I becoming? That question moves you from identity to direction. Your current financial situation is not necessarily your financial destiny. Your current relationship pattern is not necessarily your relational destiny. Your current emotional habits are not necessarily permanent. Your current understanding is not the final word. You can become more informed, more patient, more resilient, more honest, more financially organized, more emotionally intelligent, more capable of intimacy without losing independence, and every improvement expands your freedom. Here is another motivational principle to carry forward. Your future is not created by what you intend to become. It is created by what you repeatedly practice becoming. Intentions matter, but repetition transforms intention into identity. If you repeatedly practice honesty, honesty becomes easier. If you repeatedly practice saving, saving becomes normal. If you repeatedly practice communication, difficult conversations become less frightening. If you repeatedly practice respecting boundaries, boundaries become natural. If you repeatedly practice learning, curiosity becomes part of who you are. And when these behaviors become habits, freedom stops requiring heroic effort every day. It becomes part of your operating system. This is why the best life strategies are often simple, but not easy. Spend less than you earn when possible. Save consistently. Invest thoughtfully according to your goals and risk tolerance. Protect your health. Build relationships based on mutual respect. Communicate clearly. Respect consent. Develop useful skills. Avoid unnecessary dependence. Keep learning. Practice delayed gratification. These principles are not glamorous, but neither is a foundation. And yet, without the foundation, the beautiful building eventually fails. So, perhaps the real lesson is that human freedom is built from ordinary disciplines. We do not become free by escaping every responsibility. We become free by choosing responsibilities that are aligned with our values and developing the strength to carry them. We do not become free by eliminating every relationship. We become free by building relationships in which connection does not require surrendering dignity. We do not become free by refusing to care about money. We become free by learning how money works well enough that it can serve our lives. We do not become free by obeying every desire. We become free by becoming capable of choosing. And that brings us back to the question with which we began. What do we do with the complicated reality of being human? We learn, we question, we communicate. We set boundaries. We accept responsibility. We cooperate. We adapt. We build resilience. We refuse to confuse a feeling with a command. And perhaps most importantly, we stop demanding that life fit perfectly into a story someone else wrote for us. We can honor love without romanticizing control. We can value commitment without pretending humans never change. We can respect desire without allowing desire to dictate every decision. We can pursue financial success without confusing possessions with freedom. We can value independence without rejecting connection. We can build a life that contains both roots and branches. The mature life is not a life without contradiction. It is a life capable of holding contradiction without collapsing. You can love deeply and still maintain boundaries. You can desire novelty and still value commitment. You can pursue wealth and still value simplicity. You can want independence and still cherish community. You can experience fear and still act courageously. You can acknowledge your biology without using it as an excuse. And you can question the assumptions surrounding human relationships without abandoning the values of honesty, respect, responsibility, and consent. That is the balance worth pursuing, because freedom without responsibility becomes chaos. Responsibility without freedom becomes oppression. Connection without boundaries becomes dependence. Independence without connection becomes isolation. Money without purpose becomes accumulation. Purpose without resources can become frustration. The art of living is learning how these forces can support rather than destroy one another. And perhaps the most powerful financial freedom principle of all, also the simplest, build a life you do not constantly need to escape from. Do not work only to spend. Do not earn only to impress. Do not pursue relationships only to avoid loneliness. Do not chase pleasure only to escape discomfort. Do not sacrifice every present moment for an imaginary future. Build something sustainable. Build health. Build knowledge. Build trust. Build financial resilience. Build meaningful relationships. Build time into your life. Build room for uncertainty. Build room for joy. And then, when life inevitably surprises you, you will not need everything to go according to plan in order to remain standing. That is resilience. That is maturity. And in its own quiet way, that is freedom. There is a moment when every idea we have been discussing becomes personal. It is one thing to talk about human nature, desire, relationships, cooperation, freedom, and financial independence as abstract concepts. It is another thing entirely to stand in the middle of your own life and ask, what am I going to do with what I now understand? Knowledge can be fascinating, but knowledge becomes powerful only when it changes the way we live. You can understand that people are complicated and still behave impulsively. You can understand that communication matters and still avoid the conversation you desperately need to have. You can understand that financial security requires discipline and still spend money simply because you are tired, anxious, lonely, or trying to impress someone. The distance between knowing and doing is where most of life happens, and closing that distance requires something deeper than information. It requires intention. Perhaps the first step is to recognize that the life you want cannot be built entirely from other people's definitions of success. We are surrounded by measurements: salary, house size, job title, relationship status, social media attention, appearance, possessions, number of followers, number of vacations. Even our relationships can become performances, carefully arranged so that other people believe we are happy. But external measurements are often poor substitutes for internal well-being. A person can look successful while being exhausted. A person can look independent while being deeply insecure. A couple can appear perfect while avoiding difficult conversations. A person can earn an extraordinary income while having almost no control over their time. Real freedom requires a deeper measurement. Ask yourself, how much control do I have over my time? How comfortable am I saying no? Can I survive a financial setback without losing everything? Do my relationships allow me to be honest? Can I communicate a difficult truth without fear? Do I know what my values are? Am I making choices because I genuinely want them, or because I am afraid of disappointing other people? These questions reveal a different kind of wealth. And this is where sexuality, relationships, and financial freedom unexpectedly meet. All three involve choices about resources. Money is a resource. Time is a resource. Attention is a resource. Emotional energy is a resource. Sexual energy is a resource. Trust is a resource. None of these resources is infinite. The challenge is not to eliminate desire, but to decide where your resources deserve to go. Imagine your attention as a bank account. Every day, you make withdrawals. You give attention to work, family, social media, entertainment, arguments, worries, relationships, ambitions, and your own health. At the end of the day, you may discover that you spent almost everything without consciously deciding what mattered most. Financial life can work the same way. Small purchases seem insignificant individually, but their accumulation can become enormous. Small distractions work similarly. 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, another hour scrolling, another evening avoiding an important conversation, and suddenly years have passed. This is why intentionality matters. Your life is an investment portfolio, is a principle worth remembering. Whatever receives your repeated time, money, attention, and energy will eventually become one of the largest assets or liabilities in your life. That does not mean every moment must be optimized. A life without leisure is not a free life. Rest matters, play matters, pleasure matters, conversation matters, spontaneity matters. Human beings are not machines designed to maximize productivity. But there is a difference between choosing rest and escaping into distraction. There is a difference between pleasure that enriches your life and pleasure that repeatedly leaves you emptier. There is a difference between spending money on something you genuinely value and spending because an advertisement successfully created insecurity. The mature question is not, is this pleasurable? The mature question is, what does this pleasure cost me, and is the cost worth it? That question can be asked about almost anything. What does this relationship cost me? What does this career cost me? What does this lifestyle cost me? What does this debt cost me? What does avoiding this conversation cost me? What does seeking constant approval cost me? And then ask the other side of the equation. What does it give me? A relationship can cost time while giving meaning. A demanding career can cost energy while providing purpose and resources. Saving money can cost some immediate consumption, while giving future flexibility. A difficult conversation can cost temporary discomfort while preventing years of resentment. There is no life without trade-offs. Freedom is partly the ability to choose which trade-offs are worth making. This is one of the places where financial principles can teach us something profound about relationships. Investors understand opportunity cost. If you spend $1 here, you cannot spend that same dollar somewhere else. Time works exactly the same way. If you spend 3 hours in an argument that could have been resolved in 30 minutes, those hours cannot be recovered. If you spend years trying to convince someone to become a person they do not want to be, those years cannot be deposited back into your life. The lesson is not to abandon people when they are imperfect. Everyone is imperfect. The lesson is to distinguish between temporary difficulty and persistent incompatibility. Relationships require patience, but patience should not mean endless self-erasure. Commitment requires effort, but effort should not mean one person carrying the entire relationship. Forgiveness can be powerful, but forgiveness does not require repeated exposure to harm. A boundary is sometimes an act of love toward yourself, and self-respect is not selfishness. If you consistently ignore your own boundaries in order to keep someone else happy, eventually resentment may replace affection. The relationship may appear peaceful from the outside, but internally you are keeping a ledger of sacrifices. You remember every time you said yes when you wanted to say no, every time you remained silent, every time you surrendered a financial decision, every time you abandoned a friendship, every time you accepted disrespect because you were afraid of losing the relationship. That is not sustainable love. Healthy connection requires two people who are allowed to exist. This is why individuality matters even inside committed relationships. Love does not require the disappearance of the self. A partner should not become your entire social world, your only source of emotional support, your only source of identity, and your only source of financial security. That concentration creates fragility. Think about investing. If all your wealth is concentrated in one fragile asset, a single event can devastate you. Diversification cannot eliminate risk, but it can reduce dependence on one outcome. Relationships benefit from a similar principle. Maintain friendships, cultivate skills, develop interests, protect your health, understand your finances, build relationships with family or community where appropriate, create a life that has multiple sources of meaning. Then, your romantic relationship can become one of the richest parts of your life without having to become your entire life. This is not emotional distance. It is emotional resilience. The same principle applies to your partner. Encourage their friendships, encourage their interests, support their ambitions. Let them have parts of themselves that do not belong to you. The goal is not to possess another human being. The goal is to know them. Possession asks, how do I make sure you never leave? Connection asks, how can we create a relationship in which both of us freely want to remain? Those are profoundly different questions. And perhaps one of the most important insights we can develop about love is that choice matters. Being with someone because you have no alternatives is not the same as being with someone because you value the relationship. A person who stays because they are trapped may provide physical presence, but not genuine freedom. A person who stays while knowing they could leave is making a different kind of statement. That does not mean relationships should be designed around constant exit strategies. It means that healthy commitment becomes more meaningful when it is voluntary. Financial freedom can make this principle especially visible. If you have no savings, no skills, and no financial options, you may remain in a job you hate because you cannot afford to leave. If you build some financial resilience, you gain bargaining power. You may be able to negotiate. You may be able to change careers. You may be able to walk away from exploitation. Money does not guarantee freedom, but financial dependence can reduce it. That is why learning about money is not merely an economic exercise. It can be a personal development exercise. Understanding money helps you understand choices. The goal is not to worship wealth. The goal is to reduce unnecessary dependence and increase meaningful options. A powerful principle is, financial freedom is not about having enough money to do everything. It is about having enough flexibility that one bad decision by someone else does not control your entire life. This principle applies to relationships, employment, and even health. Resilience is the ability to absorb shocks, and life will deliver shocks. People change, bodies change, careers change, markets change, families change, desires change. The future refuses to sign contracts with us. So, instead of demanding certainty, build adaptability. Adaptability means learning to have conversations you never expected to have. It means revisiting financial plans when circumstances change. It means accepting that your partner may evolve. It means allowing yourself to evolve too. It means understanding that a relationship is not a museum exhibit that must remain frozen exactly as it looked on the day it began. A healthy relationship can have seasons. There can be periods of intense romance, periods of work, periods of family responsibility, periods of illness, periods of financial pressure, periods of rediscovering each other, periods when one person's needs become more demanding. The question is not whether life will change. It will. The question is whether the relationship has enough honesty and flexibility to change without losing its foundation. And this is where friendship becomes incredibly important. Romance can fluctuate. Sexual desire can change with stress, health, age, hormones, circumstances, and emotional connection. But friendship, the ability to laugh together, communicate, respect one another, enjoy shared experiences, and care about the other's well-being can provide a deeper foundation. Attraction may bring people together. Friendship can help keep them connected. Trust can help them navigate uncertainty. Shared values can help them make decisions. Communication can help them repair. None of these guarantees a lifelong relationship, but together they create conditions in which a relationship can become resilient. And resilience is not glamorous. It is often invisible. It looks like to people sitting at a kitchen table discussing a difficult expense. It looks like someone saying, I was wrong. It looks like another person saying, I understand why that hurt you. It looks like both people agreeing to seek help rather than continuing the same destructive argument. It looks like checking the budget before making a major purchase. It looks like taking care of your health before a crisis forces you to. It looks like choosing a thoughtful response instead of a satisfying reaction. The strongest lives are often built through these ordinary moments. There is another important lesson here. Do not wait for a crisis to begin practicing responsibility. You do not build financial resilience after losing your job. You build it before. You do not learn communication after a relationship collapses. You practice it while things are still repairable. You do not begin caring about your health only after receiving frightening news. You care for it while you have the opportunity. You do not begin learning about consent and boundaries after something goes wrong. You learn beforehand. Preparation is one of the most underrated forms of freedom. A person who prepares does not necessarily expect disaster. They simply respect uncertainty enough to take it seriously. This is why emergency savings are valuable. Not because you expect catastrophe every month, but because you know that eventually life will surprise you. Likewise, healthy communication is valuable, not because you expect conflict every day, but because eventually conflict will arrive. Boundaries are valuable, not because everyone is dangerous, but because relationships become healthier when expectations are clear. And knowledge about sexual health is valuable, not because intimacy should be frightening, but because informed decisions protect health, dignity, and future choices. Education reduces unnecessary fear. When people do not have reliable information, they may fill the gaps with myths. They may feel shame about normal questions. They may avoid medical care. They may believe misinformation. They may confuse social expectations with biological facts. They may make decisions based on fear rather than understanding. There is no wisdom in being embarrassed by a question that could protect your health. Ask. Learn. Speak with qualified health professionals when medical concerns arise. Understand consent. Understand protection and prevention. Understand that sexual health includes physical, emotional, and relational well-being. And understand that responsible intimacy is not a rejection of pleasure. It is a recognition that pleasure and responsibility can coexist. This is an important theme in all mature areas of life. Money and enjoyment can coexist. Love and independence can coexist. Sexuality and responsibility can coexist. Ambition and rest can coexist. Freedom and accountability can coexist. We often create false choices because extremes are easier to understand than balance. But life rarely exists at the extremes. The goal, integration. A financially healthy person does not necessarily avoid every luxury. They simply know what they can afford and why they are buying it. A healthy relationship does not necessarily eliminate every attraction to others. It develops agreements and behaviors that both people can genuinely accept. A mature person does not eliminate all fear. They learn to act wisely while fear is present. A healthy society does not eliminate individuality. It creates conditions where individuals can cooperate without losing dignity. These are not contradictions. They are skills, and skills can be learned. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that if something does not come naturally, they are incapable of learning it. But almost every valuable human skill requires practice. Communication, financial planning, emotional regulation, negotiation, conflict resolution, leadership, listening, saving, investing, cooking, parenting, intimacy. No one begins as an expert. We become capable through repetition. This should give you hope. If your financial habits are poor, you can learn. If your communication is weak, you can practice. If you struggle with jealousy, you can explore its roots. If you avoid difficult conversations, you can begin with one. If you have never learned about investing, you can start with the fundamentals. If you have never learned how to establish boundaries, you can practice saying one honest sentence. Growth does not require perfection. It requires movement. Here is a motivational principle to remember. Do not wait until you feel ready to make a wise choice. Sometimes making the wise choice is how readiness is created. You may not feel confident before your first financial plan. Create it anyway. You may not feel comfortable before your first difficult conversation. Have it respectfully anyway. You may not feel certain before setting a boundary. Set it clearly anyway. You may not feel like a disciplined person before beginning to save. Start saving anyway. Identity often follows behavior. You do not always become disciplined and then begin acting disciplined. Sometimes you begin acting with discipline, and eventually your mind accepts, this is who I am. The same applies to courage. You do not always feel courageous before acting. Sometimes courage is simply action taken while fear is present. And this matters because fear can be one of the strongest forces shaping both relationships and financial decisions. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection. Fear of being alone, fear of losing money, fear of looking unsuccessful, fear of disappointing family, fear of changing careers, fear of admitting that a relationship is unhealthy, fear of admitting that your financial habits are unsustainable. Fear can keep us in situations long after we have discovered they no longer serve us. But fear is not always an enemy. Sometimes fear is useful information. If you are about to make a reckless financial decision, fear may be warning you. If you are entering a dangerous situation, fear may protect you. If a relationship consistently violates your boundaries, discomfort may be telling you something important. The goal is not to silence fear. It is to interpret it accurately. Ask, what exactly am I afraid of? Then ask, is the fear based on evidence? Or is it based on an old story? This distinction can change your life. Suppose you are afraid to negotiate your salary because you believe asking for more will make people dislike you. The fear may be real, but the assumption may not be. Suppose you are afraid to discuss relationship expectations because you believe honest conversations destroy romance. The fear may be understandable, but the belief may be inaccurate. Suppose you are afraid to look at your finances because you expect the numbers to be terrible. The fear be justified, but avoiding the numbers cannot improve them. Information often reduces vague fear. Clarity gives fear boundaries, and boundaries make action possible. This is why you should not underestimate the power of naming things. Name the debt. Name the insecurity. Name the expectation. Name the boundary. Name the goal. Name the fear. Once something has a name, you can begin working with it. There is enormous freedom in replacing vague anxiety with specific questions. Instead of my financial future is a disaster, ask, what are my monthly expenses? Instead of my relationship is falling apart, ask, what specific behaviors are causing concern? Instead of I am not successful, ask, what does success mean to me? Instead of nobody understands me, ask, have I actually explained what I need? The mind often creates enormous problems from undefined concepts. Clarity makes them manageable. And perhaps the deepest form of clarity is understanding your values. Values are the principles that tell you what matters when two desirable things compete. You may value freedom and security. You may value adventure and stability. You may value career achievement and family time. You may value financial growth and generosity. You may value intimacy and independence. There will be moments when these values conflict. That is normal. The goal is not to eliminate the conflict. The goal is to decide consciously. If you value financial freedom, you may choose a smaller home so you can save more. If you value family time, you may reject a promotion that requires constant travel. If you value a relationship, you may invest time in difficult conversations. If you value independence, you may maintain separate accounts or personal financial goals within a shared partnership, depending on what works for both people. There is no universal formula. There are principles. And principles help you design the formula that fits your life. That is why comparing your life to someone else's can be so destructive. Their circumstances are different. Their values are different. Their resources are different. Their responsibilities are different. Their definition of happiness may be different. Do not copy someone else's financial life simply because it looks successful. Do not copy someone else's relationship because it looks romantic. Do not copy someone else's lifestyle because social media makes it look effortless. Study principles. Then apply them to your circumstances. That is true independence. And perhaps this is where the ideas of sexuality and financial freedom come together most clearly. Both require us to distinguish between external expectations and internal values. Both require responsibility. Both involve negotiation. Both can be distorted by shame, comparison, fear, and status. Both become healthier when we replace myths with knowledge. Your body is not a source of shame. Your questions are not a source of shame. Your financial mistakes are not a permanent identity. Your emotional complexity is not evidence that you are broken. You are a human being learning how to live. And learning requires room for mistakes. The goal is not to become someone who never makes a poor decision. The goal is to become someone who notices poor decisions sooner, learns from them faster, and builds systems that make repeating them less likely. That is how compound growth works in character. One mistake becomes a lesson. One lesson becomes a habit. One habit becomes a pattern. One pattern becomes a reputation. One reputation becomes a life. So choose the pattern carefully. If you want trust, practice honesty. If you want respect, practice respecting boundaries. If you want financial security, practice living below your means when possible. If you want freedom, practice delayed gratification. If you want meaningful relationships, practice listening. If you want confidence, practice keeping promises to yourself. If you want health, practice caring for your body before it demands your attention. The future is not built in one dramatic moment. It is built through repetition, and that is why every ordinary day matters. The world may never applaud you for paying off a debt. It may never congratulate you for having a difficult conversation calmly. It may never celebrate the moment you resist an impulse that would have harmed your future. It may never know that you chose integrity when nobody was watching. But those moments are still building something. They are building you. And perhaps the most meaningful definition of wealth is not what you possess at the end of your life, but who you became while building it. If you become wealthy but lose your health, your relationships, your integrity, and your peace, the price may have been too high. If you build a modest financial life while gaining time, health, friendship, love, and freedom, you may have achieved something far more valuable than a number. Money should serve the human being. Relationships should enrich the human being. Knowledge should empower the human being. And freedom should make it possible to live according to what genuinely matters. So let us stop asking only, how much can I get? Let us ask, what kind of life can I build? How much money do I need to feel secure? How much time do I want for the people I love? What kind of relationship allows both people to remain whole? What boundaries protect my dignity? What habits protect my future? What kind of success would still feel meaningful if nobody else ever saw it? Those questions take us beyond performance. They take us into purpose. And purpose is where freedom becomes personal, because there is no universal version of a successful life. There is only the life you are responsible for designing. You may choose a conventional relationship. You may choose a different arrangement. You may choose a demanding career. You may choose a simpler one. You may prioritize aggressive financial growth. You may prioritize time and flexibility. What matters is that your choices are informed, ethical, consensual, sustainable, and aligned with your values. Do not use freedom as an excuse to ignore responsibility. Do not use responsibility as an excuse to eliminate freedom. Build both. That is the challenge. And perhaps it is also the opportunity. Because when you understand your desires, examine your assumptions, protect your health, respect other people's autonomy, communicate honestly, and build financial resilience. You begin to possess something that cannot easily be taken from you. Not perfection, not certainty, something better. Capacity. The capacity to adapt. The capacity to choose, the capacity to recover, the capacity to love without possessing, the capacity to pursue wealth without becoming owned by it. The capacity to experience desire without becoming controlled by it. The capacity to face uncertainty without surrendering your judgment. And that capacity is the foundation upon which a genuinely free life can be built. So remember this final principle as we move toward the conclusion of our journey. Do not measure your freedom by how many doors you can open. Measure it by how many doors you can walk away from when they no longer lead where you want to go. That is financial freedom. That is emotional freedom. That is relational freedom. And ultimately, that is the freedom to become the author of your own life. The most important journey does not end when we discover a new idea. It begins when we decide to live differently because of what we have learned. We can spend years asking what human beings are supposed to want, how relationships are supposed to work, what desire means, what commitment should look like, or how much money is enough. But eventually every theory has to meet the ordinary reality of a human life. We wake up in the morning, we make decisions, we speak to the people we love, we spend or save money, we respond to temptation, we experience attraction, we become disappointed, we forgive, we set boundaries, we make mistakes, we begin again. This is where all our understanding is tested, not in an abstract argument, but in the small moments when nobody is giving us instructions and we have to decide for ourselves what kind of person we want to be. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that human beings are neither as simple nor as predictable as the stories we tell about them. We are capable of profound loyalty and powerful curiosity. We can want security and novelty, independence and intimacy, stability and adventure. We can be generous one day and selfish the next. We can make brilliant decisions in one area of life and remarkably poor decisions in another. We can understand something intellectually and still struggle emotionally to accept it. None of this makes us failures. It makes us human. The challenge is not to eliminate every contradiction inside ourselves. The challenge is to understand those contradictions well enough that they do not control our lives. That is particularly important when we think about sexuality. Sexuality is not merely a biological mechanism, nor is it simply a cultural invention. Human sexual behavior exists at the intersection of bodies, emotions, relationships, social expectations, personal history, health, opportunity, values, and individual choice. This complexity is precisely why simplistic explanations can be so attractive and so misleading. We want one answer. We want one rule. We want to know exactly what men are like, exactly what women are like, exactly what love means, exactly what commitment requires. But human beings resist such neat categories. A more useful approach is curiosity. Instead of asking, what is everyone supposed to do? Ask, what is actually happening here? Instead of asking, why does everyone behave this way? Ask, what biological, psychological, social, and personal forces might be influencing this behavior? Instead of asking, is this desire good or bad? Ask, what does this desire mean to me, and how can I respond to it responsibly? Questions create space for thought. And thought creates space for choice. That space may be one of the most precious things a person can possess, because a desire is not a command. An emotion is not a prophecy. An attraction is not an obligation. A fear is not necessarily a fact, and a social expectation is not automatically a moral law. You can experience something without allowing it to define you. That principle can change the way we think about jealousy. Jealousy is real. It can be painful, overwhelming, and deeply human, but the feeling itself does not determine the behavior that follows. A jealous person can interrogate, accuse, monitor, manipulate, or punish. Another person can experience the same emotion and say, something inside me feels threatened. I want to understand why. The second response does not make the feeling disappear. It transforms the feeling into information. Perhaps jealousy is sometimes telling us that we fear losing someone. Perhaps it is telling us that an agreement has become unclear. Perhaps it is exposing an old wound. Perhaps it is revealing insecurity. Perhaps there has genuinely been a breach of trust. The emotion alone cannot tell us which explanation is correct. We need communication. We need evidence. We need reflection. We need the courage to distinguish between what we know and what we imagine. That distinction is equally important in financial life. Financial anxiety can make a person feel as though disaster is guaranteed even when the situation is manageable. Or it can make someone ignore real warning signs because acknowledging them is uncomfortable. In both cases, emotion can distort perception. The solution is not to become emotionless. The solution is to combine emotion with information. Look at the numbers. Understand the situation. Separate facts from assumptions. Then make a decision. This is why financial literacy is a form of personal power. When you understand your income, expenses, debt, savings, investments, taxes, insurance, and long-term goals, you are less dependent on vague impressions. You may still experience fear, but your fear has something concrete to work with. A powerful principle is this: clarity turns fear from a monster into a problem. A monster is something you can only run from. A problem is something you can study. If your expenses are too high, calculate them. If your debt is growing, list it. If your savings are inadequate, determine what you can realistically change. If your career feels unstable, identify the skills that could increase your options. If your financial goals are unclear, define them. Do not allow an undefined future to consume a defined present. The same principle works in relationships. If you are unhappy, identify why. If you feel disconnected, describe what disconnection means. If trust has been damaged, identify the behavior that damaged it. If expectations differ, discuss them. If boundaries have been crossed, name the boundary. The clearer the problem, the more possible solutions become. And sometimes the solution will not be what we hoped. Sometimes the people discover that they want fundamentally different lives. One may want children while the other does not. One may want a highly conventional relationship while the other wants something different. One may prioritize career ambition while the other wants a quieter life. One may want financial risk while the other values security. One may need extensive independence while the other needs more togetherness. None of these differences automatically makes either person wrong. But love does not guarantee compatibility. That is a difficult truth, and yet accepting it can be liberating. We sometimes believe that if we love someone enough, every difference can be solved. But some differences are not problems to solve. They are realities to understand. You cannot negotiate someone into wanting the life you want. You cannot force compatibility through intensity. You cannot build a sustainable partnership by hoping that another person will eventually become different. Sometimes maturity means accepting that affection and compatibility are separate questions. You can care about someone deeply and still recognize that the relationship is not sustainable. You can appreciate someone's qualities without being able to build a life together. You can grieve a relationship without deciding that it was meaningless. And you can leave a relationship without declaring that love was a mistake. The same wisdom applies to careers and money. You can be good at a job and still decide that the lifestyle it requires is not worth the cost. You can earn a high income and still realize that the trade-off is destroying your health. You can have invested years in a particular path and still recognize that continuing simply because you have already invested so much may be irrational. This is the danger of sunk cost thinking. Past investment does not automatically justify future investment. The question is not, how much have I already put into this? The question is, given where I am today, is continuing the best use of my remaining resources? That question can be painful, but it can also prevent years of unnecessary suffering. Financial freedom requires this kind of thinking. If a lifestyle is consuming nearly every dollar you earn, the fact that you have already become accustomed to it does not mean you must maintain it forever. You can redesign. Perhaps gradually, perhaps imperfectly, but you can change the direction. The same is true of relationships. You can say, "This is how we have always communicated, but it is not working anymore. Let's learn another way." Growth often begins with that sentence. "This is how we have always done it" is not a reason to continue. It is merely a description of the past, and the past deserves respect, but it does not deserve unlimited authority over the future. That is one of the deepest principles of freedom. You are allowed to revise your life. You are allowed to learn something new and change your mind. You are allowed to discover that a belief you inherited no longer fits your values. You are allowed to become a different person from the person who began the journey. In fact, refusing to change simply to remain consistent with your younger self can become another form of imprisonment. Think about the beliefs we inherit about success. Perhaps you were taught that a successful person must own a large home, drive an impressive car, work constantly, and demonstrate visible wealth. But perhaps you discover that what you actually value is time. You want mornings without rushing. You want to see your family. You want to travel slowly. You want meaningful work rather than prestigious work. You want financial security rather than public status. That realization may require courage, because once you stop measuring success by someone else's standards, you have to create your own measurement, and that responsibility can feel frightening, but it is also empowering. Perhaps your definition of financial freedom is not becoming extraordinarily rich. Perhaps it is reaching the point where your basic expenses are manageable. You have emergency reserves. You are not buried in high-interest debt, and you have enough flexibility to make choices based on values rather than panic. That is a legitimate definition of wealth. Perhaps your definition of relationship success is not staying together for a predetermined number of decades. Perhaps it is building a relationship characterized by honesty, respect, affection, consent, friendship, and the freedom for both people to remain fully human. That is a legitimate definition too. The point is not to create one universal model. The point is to create a life consciously. Here is a principle I would want you to remember. A life designed by default will usually reflect other people's priorities. A life designed deliberately has a chance to reflect your own. That does not mean rejecting society. We need society. We need institutions. We need laws. We need communities. We need cultural traditions. But participation is different from unconscious obedience. You can respect tradition while questioning it. You can respect biology while recognizing individual differences. You can value commitment while discussing what commitment means for the people involved. You can pursue money without making wealth the center of your identity. You can value freedom without treating responsibility as oppression. Balance is not weakness. Balance is sophistication. And sophisticated thinking becomes increasingly important as our lives become more complex. Modern people have extraordinary choices compared with many previous generations. We have access to information, technology, education, travel, medical knowledge, financial tools, communication, and social networks that can connect us across enormous distances. But more choices do not automatically produce better decisions. Sometimes more choices produce more anxiety. When everything appears possible, choosing one path can feel like losing all the others. This is where values become essential. Values help us choose. If you know what matters most, you can say no to opportunities that do not fit. That is true freedom. Not saying yes to everything. Being capable of saying no. Financially, this might mean refusing a purchase that would impress other people but damage your long-term goals. Professionally, it might mean refusing a position that pays more but destroys the lifestyle you want. Relationally, it might mean refusing behavior that violates your boundaries. Sexually, it might mean recognizing your desires while making sure every action respects consent. Health, in the agreements you have chosen. Saying no can be difficult because it closes doors. But every yes closes doors to. Every choice allocates your finite resources. You cannot give your full attention to everything. You cannot spend every dollar twice. You cannot live every possible life. That is why choosing is an act of courage. And once you accept that, you can stop mourning every road you did not take. There will always be another life you could have lived. Another career. Another city. Another relationship. Another investment. Another adventure. Another version of yourself. You cannot experience all of them. You can only live one life at a time. The goal is not to eliminate regret. The goal is to make choices you can respect. And perhaps this is where our exploration should ultimately lead. Not toward a rigid answer about how every human being must live, but toward a deeper respect for complexity, responsibility, freedom, and choice. We do not need to pretend that biology does not matter. We do not need to pretend culture does not matter. We do not need to pretend individual differences do not matter. We do not need to pretend relationships are easy. We do not need to pretend money is irrelevant. And we do not need to pretend that freedom means doing whatever we want whenever we want. Real freedom is more demanding. It asks us to understand ourselves. It asks us to understand other people. It asks us to accept consequences. It asks us to respect boundaries. It asks us to learn. It asks us to plan. It asks us to adapt. And above all, it asks us to take responsibility for the choices that remain within our control. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Your nature may influence the starting point. Your circumstances may influence the road, but your repeated choices help determine the direction. You do not have to become someone else. You have to become more conscious of yourself. You do not have to eliminate desire. You have to learn how to live with desire responsibly. You do not have to reject relationships. You have to build relationships that respect autonomy and mutual dignity. You do not have to worship money. You have to understand it well enough that it can support the life you value. You do not have to predict the future. You have to prepare yourself to meet it. And you do not have to achieve perfection. You have to keep learning. That may be the most realistic definition of progress. Not becoming flawless, but becoming more capable. More capable of understanding. More capable of communicating. More capable of saving. More capable of recovering. More capable of loving. More capable of saying no. More capable of saying yes for the right reasons. More capable of facing uncertainty. More capable of making decisions that your future self will respect. Financial freedom, emotional freedom, and relational freedom ultimately share the same foundation. Awareness followed by deliberate action. Awareness tells you what is happening. Values tell you what matters. Discipline turns values into behavior. And time reveals the results. So give yourself time. Do not demand that one conversation heal years of misunderstanding. Do not demand that 1 month of saving solve years of financial neglect. Do not demand that one book transform every belief you have ever inherited. Let change compound. Let knowledge deepen. Let trust develop. Let habits become stronger. Let your choices accumulate. And when you make a mistake, return to the process. Look honestly. Learn what happened. Repair what can be repaired. Accept what cannot. Then take the next step. There is no requirement that you remain imprisoned by yesterday. The next decision is still yours. Perhaps that is the most hopeful message we can leave with. The human story is not simply about instincts, circumstances, or inherited expectations. It is also about reflection. We can examine the stories we were given. We can challenge assumptions. We can create agreements. We can build systems. We can learn from other people. We can protect ourselves without closing ourselves off from connection. We can pursue security without becoming obsessed with accumulation. We can experience pleasure without abandoning responsibility. We can love without possession, and we can build freedom slowly, one choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one saved dollar at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one new skill at a time, one act of courage at a time. Until one day, we look back and realize that the life we are living was not created by one extraordinary moment. It was created by thousands of ordinary moments in which we chose, again and again, what mattered. So build carefully, love consciously, learn continuously, spend intentionally, save patiently. Protect your health, respect consent, keep your promises, question inherited assumptions. Make room for other people's autonomy. Make room for your own. And never confuse having more with being freer. The richest life is not necessarily the one with the most possessions, the most attention, or the most excitement. It may be the one in which your resources, your money, time, attention, health, relationships, and energy are increasingly aligned with the things you genuinely value. That is the kind of wealth worth pursuing, and that is the kind of freedom worth protecting, because at the end of the day, the deepest question is not how many experiences we managed to collect, how much money we accumulated, or how many people desired us. The deeper question is whether we learned to live deliberately, whether we became capable of giving love without demanding ownership, whether we became capable of pursuing security without surrendering curiosity, whether we became capable of enjoying the present without destroying the future, whether we became capable of standing alone without becoming isolated, whether we became capable of standing beside another person without disappearing into them, whether we learned to use money, a tool, rather than allowing it to become our master, whether we learned to respect our biology without using biology as an excuse for irresponsibility, whether we learn to accept complexity without surrendering our judgment, and whether, after everything we have experienced, we remain willing to learn. That is where the journey ends, and where the real work begins, because the purpose of understanding human nature is not merely to win an argument about human nature. It is to understand ourselves well enough to live with greater honesty. The purpose of financial freedom is not merely to accumulate wealth. It is to create choices. The purpose of relationships is not merely to avoid loneliness. It is to experience connection without sacrificing dignity. The purpose of knowledge is not merely to know more. It is to make wiser decisions. And the purpose of freedom is not merely to escape restrictions. It is to become responsible for what we do with the freedom we have. So step into your life with curiosity rather than certainty. Ask better questions. Listen more carefully, learn the facts, respect other people's choices, protect your own boundaries, build financial resilience, invest in skills, nurture relationships that are based on mutual respect. And when the world tells you that you must live according to someone else's script, pause before accepting it. You are allowed to examine the script, you are allowed to edit it, you are allowed to discover that some pages are useful and others are not. You are allowed to write new ones. Just remember that freedom comes with authorship. If you want to be the author of your life, you must also accept responsibility for the sentences you write. And perhaps that is the final principle. Freedom begins when you stop asking who is supposed to write your story and start taking responsibility for the choices that shape it. Not every chapter will be beautiful. Some will be confusing. Some will hurt. Some will surprise you. Some will teach you more than you wanted to know. But keep writing. Keep learning. Keep choosing. Keep building. Because a meaningful life is not a life in which everything goes according to plan. It is a life in which, despite uncertainty, you continue to choose with awareness, act with responsibility, love with respect, and build with patience. And that is a form of freedom no one else can give you, and no temporary setback has the power to take away. That means accepting that even thoughtful choices can produce painful outcomes. There is no perfect decision-making system. You can make the best decision you can with the information available and still encounter circumstances you could not predict. Do not punish yourself forever for failing to predict the unpredictable. Learn. Adapt. Continue. Resilience means refusing to let one chapter become the entire story. A failed relationship is a chapter. A financial mistake is a chapter. A career setback is a chapter. A period of confusion is a chapter. Even success is only a chapter. Do not build your entire identity around any one chapter, and do not allow anyone else to convince you that your story is already finished. The future remains open precisely because human beings can learn. That is why education is one of the greatest forms of financial and personal investment. Every useful skill you develop increases your potential options. Every new piece of knowledge can challenge an old assumption. Every thoughtful conversation can reveal a perspective you had not considered. Every mistake can become tuition if you learn from it. Think of mistakes as tuition, but remember that tuition is valuable only if you attend the class. Making the same mistake repeatedly without reflection is not learning. Learning requires adjustment. If you repeatedly overspend, change the system. If you repeatedly choose relationships based only on intense chemistry and ignore compatibility, examine the pattern. If you repeatedly avoid difficult conversations until resentment explodes, change how early you communicate. If you repeatedly make financial decisions from fear, educate yourself and create a plan. Systems matter because willpower is limited. Do not build your life around the assumption that you will always be disciplined. Make the wise choice easier. Automate savings where appropriate. Create spending limits. Schedule important conversations. Protect time for health. Remove unnecessary temptations. Build environments that support the person you want to become. This is another major financial freedom principle. Do not depend entirely on motivation. Build systems that continue working when motivation disappears. Motivation is wonderful, but motivation fluctuates. Systems remain. The person who saves only when they feel inspired will struggle. The person who creates a sustainable habit has a better chance of continuing. The same is true of relationships. You cannot wait until you feel romantic to communicate. You cannot wait until conflict becomes unbearable to talk about expectations. You cannot wait until trust is broken to discuss boundaries. Healthy relationships require maintenance, like financial health. Relational health is easier to maintain than to repair after years of neglect. This does not mean relationships must become clinical or scheduled. It means we should respect the fact that meaningful things require attention. Your body requires attention. Your finances require attention. Your friendships require attention. Your partnership requires attention. Your mind requires attention. Neglect is also a decision. And often it is a decision made invisibly. Nobody announces, "Today I will neglect my future." Instead, we say, "I'll deal with it later." Later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. Then suddenly the problem is enormous. This is why small acts of responsibility matter so much. Check the account. Make the appointment. Have the conversation. Take the walk. Read the book. Ask the question. Review the plan. Save the money. Say the truth. Small maintenance prevents large repairs. And yet, despite all our planning, we must leave room for spontaneity. A life completely optimized for efficiency can become emotionally empty. Human beings need surprise. We need laughter. We need play. We need experiences that cannot be measured in spreadsheets. We need moments that exist simply because they are beautiful. Financial freedom should therefore not mean maximizing every dollar. It should mean deciding what deserves your dollars. The same principle applies to time. Do not ask only, "What is the most productive use of this hour?" Sometimes the most valuable use of an hour is sitting with someone you love. Sometimes it is doing nothing. Sometimes it is being curious. Sometimes it is resting. Sometimes it is making love within a healthy, consensual relationship. Sometimes it is watching the sunset. A life is not a business, and people are not projects. The purpose of financial freedom is ultimately to create more space for living, not merely to become better at accumulating. If your pursuit of wealth leaves no room for life, you have confused the tool with the goal. Money is a tool. Sexuality is part of human life. Relationships are a source of connection. Work can provide purpose. None of these should automatically become the entire definition of who you are. You are larger than your bank balance. You are larger than your relationship status. You are larger than your sexual history. You are larger than your job title. You are larger than your mistakes. And once you understand that, you can begin making choices from a place of dignity rather than desperation. Dignity changes everything. A person who believes they have no worth may accept terrible treatment. A person who understands their worth can say, "This is not acceptable." A person who believes they must prove success may overspend. A person who understands their values can say, "I do not need to impress everyone." A person who believes love must be earned through self-erasure may become controlling or submissive. A person who understands mutual dignity can say, "We both deserve to remain whole." That is the kind of freedom worth pursuing. Not freedom from all responsibility. Freedom from unnecessary fear. Freedom from unconscious expectations. Freedom from financial fragility where it can reasonably be reduced. Freedom from relationships built on control. Freedom from the belief that your worth depends entirely on external approval. And freedom to choose. Choice is the thread connecting everything. We choose how to respond to attraction. We choose how to communicate. We choose whether to respect consent. We choose whether to learn. We choose how to spend. We choose what to save. We choose what risks to take. We choose which relationships to nurture. We choose which boundaries to defend. We choose which beliefs to keep. We choose what kind of future we are willing to build. Not every choice is equally available to every person. Circumstances matter. Health matters. Economics matter. Family obligations matter. Social conditions matter. We should never pretend that individual willpower explains everything. But acknowledging constraints does not require surrendering agency. Even within difficult circumstances, there may be choices. Sometimes the choice is simply what we learn. Sometimes it is who we ask for help. Sometimes it is whether we tell the truth. Sometimes it is whether we take the next step. And sometimes the smallest available choice is enough to begin changing the direction of a life. So, if you are listening to this and thinking about your own future, do not ask yourself to transform everything overnight. Choose one area. Maybe it is money. Know your numbers. Maybe it is health. Make one appointment. Maybe it is a relationship. Have one honest conversation. Maybe it is emotional resilience. Begin noticing your reactions. Maybe it is education. Learn one concept deeply. Maybe it is freedom. Identify one unnecessary dependency and begin reducing it. Progress does not require a dramatic announcement. It requires consistency. And consistency is powerful because it compounds. A small amount of money invested consistently can grow. A small improvement in health can compound. A small improvement in communication can transform a relationship. A small increase in knowledge can change a career. A small reduction in unnecessary spending can create breathing room. A small increase in courage can change what you believe is possible. This is why you should never dismiss the ordinary. Ordinary choices create extraordinary outcomes when repeated long enough. Remember this: the future rarely arrives as a single miracle. More often, it arrives disguised as hundreds of ordinary decisions. That is both a warning and a promise. Your ordinary decisions matter. The purchase nobody else sees. The apology nobody applauds. The boundary nobody understands. The savings nobody celebrates. The hour spent learning. The decision to walk away from an unhealthy situation. The decision to remain and work through a difficult but healthy challenge. These choices are building your future. And eventually, people may look at the life you created and call it luck. They may see financial security and not see the years of discipline. They may see a healthy relationship and not see the conversations. They may see confidence and not see the moments of fear. They may see freedom and not see the sacrifices that created it. That is fine. You do not need everyone to understand your process. You need to understand it yourself, because the ultimate reward is not applause. It is alignment. The feeling that your external life increasingly resembles your internal values, that your money supports your priorities, that your relationships respect your dignity, that your desires can coexist with your principles, that your work supports rather than consumes your identity, that your future is not completely controlled by circumstances you failed to prepare for. That is a form of wealth no bank statement can fully capture.